Hello and welcome to yet another week of the Shadowverse Open. We are in Season 3. That's a lot of seasons. The third season of the Shadowverse Open, and today is all about Europe. My name is Rainy. That's Exo. That's Mofu joining us on the casting panel, I guess I should call it. TV monitors. That's actually how they are in real life. All the pictures of them where they just look like normal humans, it's not right. That's a projection that walks around.
We live in a TV box. This is our universe.
Yeah, we're astrally projecting right now. Just a guess for you.
Yes.
Well, we got ourselves a tournament today. Let's look at what the tournament has to offer and where it leads. We are in the Invitational stages, so that's the third box from the left, or the second from the right. It's the top 12 from Europe in this case, playing out a round robin. That happens for 5 weeks. Correcting myself here. And we are on the third week of it? Oh my god.
Fourth week.
Fourth week?
Mm-hmm.
Time flies. I can't believe we're already through the fourth week. And that's going to mean that a lot of these scorelines are going to finalize themselves. The top 6 from the European round robin stages will move on to the regional finals. And that's going to decide who the first place winner is going to be, who the grand champion is going to be. So 4 weeks of round robin. These players aren't playing for nothing. You know, there's some prizes to win here. And week 4 will be a little more telling for who is going to make that cut and who is not. 4th place from each group, $250 on the line. But unfortunately, they will not move on to the regional finals. It will be the top 3 from each group, making 6. And then everybody who makes it to the regional finals wins cash prizing. But first place winning $6,500 at the top end. $3,000 for second, $2,500 for third, $1,500 for fourth, and 5th and 6th both get $950. So that's a lot of money. 4 weeks is a lot of time, but there's 1 week after this one that they still have to play. I think Europe has been shaping up to be very interesting to me. And why I say that is because we have a good amount of both returning players demonstrating that they can be very capable, as well as new players that have started to take the place of some of these returning players as well. And I think Europe is probably, I imagine, at both regions, I think this is a case where there's a great divide, right? These players are in the chaos that is competition.
Oh yeah. I mean, we have some firecrackers in the EU. Don't get me wrong. We've got Pain, we've got Meow, we've got Bad. I mean, we've got a whole bevy of new players that we just want to see more from, and I love to watch their growth. We talked a lot about it last season, about watching the players throughout the entire season. I think this season, more than any other, as far as EU is concerned, really is going to shine a light on how well these players can develop over time, and I for one find it fascinating.
Let's take a look at the schedule to see what these matches have to offer. We've got Bad versus Best Marmot, which is a big match here. 2 new players in this season. Kionis versus Essia, Pain versus Fatina, Matt Allen versus Meow, Sizoni versus Onion Sheep, and Akamaru Red versus Das V. It's going to be our schedule for the day today. So, that means we will be kicking off with, as I mentioned, these 2 new players here to the season. Now, Best Marmot, we know a little bit about, right? He's kind of a big card game player, kind of well known in the French community, while Bad is a little bit more of a new character here in the Shadowverse tournament. Let's take a look at their decks and their overview. Exo, why don't you kick it off for us today here? Bloodcraft and Dragoncraft banned on each side, so that's going to mean that Forest Dragon is left for Bad and Rune Forest is left for Best Marmot. What are we looking at here in terms of the speed at which these people are deciding to play today, and who would you give the advantage to?
So it looks like the aggro decks essentially on both sides got banned out. So we're just going to see a straightforward combo on combo on combo on combo. It's just going to be a lot of who can get things done the fastest. And this is the wild card matchup. Before I saw this matchup today, I expected the bans to be as such. And this is kind of a toss-up. We're really just going to see who can actually execute the fastest and who doesn't make any mistakes along the way.
All right. Well, let's get a little deeper look into one of the decks here. And we're going to be talking about Bad's Forest Craft list. Mofu, if you can help us out a little bit. One card that we want to focus on, Crystalia Aaron, is a big card for Forest. I think it's one of the cards that has helped it a lot kind of transition into the late game, despite the fact that a lot of players have been playing Forest in the aggro variation. Talk to me a little bit about Crystalia Aaron.
I think the most interesting thing about Aaron that we're going to see a lot in these matches, as both players are playing 3 copies, is that Aaron gives an otherwise what used to be a pretty linear deck that just really wanted to get to its OTK something else to do. It now has the option to stall for time because she's hard to get through, she gives you more time to play with 3 more health, and she gives you more options if you do manage to get that evolution point, so she can extend games and give you more time to get a stronger combo going. In this list particularly, I think this is exactly what Bad wants. She has other options like Cassiopeia to swing the board back. She's got a lot more she can do per game than just go for the combo in a linear pace. So I think we'll see this card a lot, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this like mirror tends to go.
In terms of, and as we kind of look over this list here, it seems like a pretty straightforward Roach list. One of the things that I kind of want to talk about is Ancient Elf. That's a card that, you know, for the longest time has been a must include in pretty much every single Forest list you could ever imagine. But recently, with the kind of Token Fairy aggro lists that have come out, cutting Ancient Elf, how do you feel about this card and what function does it serve in a Roach combo deck? Exo, if you can go through that a little.
Yeah, sure. So Ancient Elf used to get a lot more value because you could play things like Goblin and, you know, other things before it so that it could get pumped up and be an aggressive threat. In this style of a deck, you see it used alongside Angelic Snipe to just kind of help in the mid game to get that extra little bit of poke damage so that you can actually accumulate lethal in your hand on turns 7, 8, 9 whenever you want to go off. So it's just a key role player in setting up a little defense when it needs to and also poking a little damage with Roach when it needs to. So it's still a key role in the deck, or it still has a key role in the deck, but it's not the thing that you just need to have all the time like it used to be.
So we've taken a good look at kind of the Roach list, and I'm going to assume that looking at Best Marmot's list, it's going to be fairly combo-centric as well. What, in your mind, Mofu, is going to be the main thing that these players will have to achieve in kind of combo mirror matches, or even specifically in the Roach mirror? In your experience, what do you think is going to be the key difference here?
Now, the Roach mirror is really interesting, but if I had to name one thing, it comes down to the exact mid-game of what can they accomplish on turns 4, 5, and 6. I think the biggest key component of getting your Roach combo off, especially in a mirror where you might have time to, or a lot of time to, is getting off Elven Princess Mage and Fortune Hunter Fina. Even just being able to hold 0-cost fairies or that 0-cost Goblin Mage can single-handedly win these matchups. So it comes down to this like back and forth of, can I put enough pressure to where playing Fortune Hunter Fina on curve or later in the game is going to be tough for my opponent? We'll probably see a lot of boxing like that.
So here's the next question. For either of you, if you have a thought or opinion, go first or go second?
Second.
Second.
Every single time. If we're talking about just Roach versus Roach, more Evo points means more damage for combos, more Evos for Fortune Hunter Venus, more Evos for Elven Princess Mage. The end. If you can do more of that stuff, you're probably winning.
This just in, my friends. We now want to go second. Going first is no longer. Sell your stocks. Don't
That's
go
right.
first.
Sell your stocks in first. No good here.
But that is interesting, right? The evolution orbs have classically been so important for Roach for those reasons of getting the 0 drops and getting that special effect. We'll see if that plays out. Look to the mid game, Best Marmot versus Bad, and it looks like they're going to avoid the Forest match for now. So it's going to be Rune versus Dragon. Guys, take it away.
This one's interesting, Mofu. I know we've been talking about this a couple times in the last few weeks here, but we've noticed that D-Shift actually is starting to pull ahead of Dragon in most cases, unless they can get to their combo immediately, and then it just flip-flops. Do you think anything's changed? Do you think it's much the same?
That's really hard for me to call because I feel like the main thing that has made D-Shift so commanding lately is both that it's become a lot faster about getting to the combo, and that it's found better matchups against previously difficult matchups like aggro with cards like Chimera, like how Best Marmot is opening here. But as for Dragon, cards that help swing back tempo like Chimera aren't really that helpful. Dragon tends to just shrug that off. But if you can open the combo and get to it quickly, then that's where you can tend to try to keep up pace and take Dragon out before they get enough damage in.
That makes sense. And that's kind of why I said it's like all combo today, because I don't even feel like Dragon is a control deck anymore. It can play control, But I think it's just a full-on combo deck now. You just try to ramp as fast as you possibly can. If you're playing Fortes, stick a couple Fortes in the mid game, and then end game, you're just Erding, Arietting, Queen of the Dread Sea, Genesis Dragon, whatever your finisher is, and you just try to do it as fast as possible.
Yeah, and something I find interesting about that too is part of the combo style gameplay that you mentioned that Dragon's headed towards is actually that they don't have 20 exact damage in that Queen of the Dread Sea combo in the late game.
Right.
Right. I remember people used to play like Ariat, and that would bring you up to like 18 by evolving Genesis Dragon. I see everyone today who's brought this has replaced it with Erd, which with an evolve point, actually I think brings that down to about a range of 16 with an evolve point, meaning this deck has to find at least 2 to 4 damage before it actually gets to that point where it can slam down its combo, which could be difficult against D-Shift.
That's true. I'm sure we'll see a few Ariats today, but yeah, a lot of players definitely switching for the Erd, probably just because of consistency with Ayala. It just means that you can ramp faster if you need to, and it's not just stuck in your hand doing nothing until the combo. So I like them both. I like a little bit of a mixture, but I can see swinging one way or another. Absolutely.
Though I've always found it difficult to really call this matchup, just because it's hard to really completely track the progress both players have made on getting to where they just like have that lethal threat on their opponent. But D-Shift, it can be a bit easier because you can just track at what point can they actually play it. Have they drawn a giant chimera yet? When it comes to Dragon, it's like, how is he going to get that like little poke of about 4 more damage this game?
Well, Public Enemy number 1, the card that we were talking about before the cast, Ayala. Ayala is probably like I want to say it's a really weird piece of glue in the deck, right? Like it's very unassuming. 3 play point 2/2, but generally speaking, because people don't want to kill her, she can net that 2 to 4 extra damage in a game that you wouldn't normally otherwise be able to get. And I find that very interesting because it's a card that you wouldn't think is the damage dealer of the deck, but I feel like it's the linchpin of the early and mid game. And when you don't draw it, it's much harder, like we see in this game where Best Marmot's still at 20.
Yeah, actually every single time I lose this matchup from the D-Shift perspective, it's because there were Ayelas that I couldn't do anything about. The card, and I think probably the most unfortunate thing about it in this matchup, even though Bad hasn't opened it, is it's immune to Kaleidoscopic Glow. So you have to give your opponent the ramp, or you give them the damage for the combo later on.
Right. That's absolutely correct. And it looks like, from what we can see, Bad is on her way. She's got pretty much an entire combo, plus a Forte for next turn. And now it's on Best Marmot to just see if he can get there. I mean, he's definitely got all the pieces he needs. It's just, can he do them all in time?
At least he can get a bit of value on the Chimera, and I think the hardest thing about D-Shift's position in this matchup is when it does find time for tempo swings, like I mentioned earlier, like a Chimera here, it doesn't really translate to much threat on Bad. Dragon is so full of healing and ways to deal with board that she can really just kind of shrug the situation off, whereas maybe any other deck like Aggro would have to stop and actually deal with this sudden 4/4 body.
Right. That's absolutely correct. And like you said, I mean, as far as ignoring goes, I feel like Bad could just play a Forte right now and just not care about this Chimera at all. Get the 7 damage in, still has an Evo point left, can still push to the late game. However, that does stop her from ramping. And actually, she can actually set up this turn to do a Fervor, so that next turn she's on 9, then play the Forte, and maybe a removal option, and then 10 just close out the game. So this could go either way, a Fervor or a Forte this turn, I think.
Realistically, with only the way a lot of players tend to sometimes count their opponent's progress on D-Shift is the approximate shadows their opponent has. So if he's played 8 spells, then she could count, one of them was Sorcery Cache, I think. Then D-Shift goes down to about 10 or 9. That means that this Chimera isn't going to threaten lethal by any means. It's still very far out of the range for that. No Magic Owls played. So as you said, she could just do this, just completely ignore it, leave it on the board, and just set up her damage for the next few turns.
Yeah, and draws a Staircase so that she doesn't overdraw. It's a nice little perfect draw there. Uses the Breath, of course, before the Fervor, so she didn't overdraw in the first place. So I think this is a nice little roundabout way of plays here. Oh, okay, keeps the Staircase. Interesting.
Huh. Why do you think that she kept the Staircase there, if that's the case? The only thing that I can think of off the top of my head is, if a player keeps Staircase, they probably want to pop it and search something, but her hand already looks loaded to me.
Yeah, she's got everything she needs. I don't know if she's ever really going to find the time to play it for 5 either, so maybe just, you know what, she's just like, I don't need it, I don't care, I got everything already.
Actually, after asking that question, I came up with the answer. She's just playing around Kaleidoscopic Glow, and now I respect that very much.
That makes sense. That makes sense. You know what? And seeing that Best Marmot has 3 Kaleidoscopic Glows in hand is a great choice, slowing him down immensely. All those Wind Blasts do nothing. All those Kaleidoscopic Glows do nothing. So basically, just saying you can attack me, but that's about it.
But now she has moved on into a pretty peculiar situation. The Forte can go face here. Actually, the Evolve made this very tricky. Forte going face, I think, has been eliminated, actually, as opposed to what I was about to say, just because the Breath follow-up doesn't actually get rid of its evolved body anymore. So this might actually slow down Bad to the point where she does have to stop and deal with it.
Which is kind of unfortunate, which means that Best Marmot actually gets a few extra turns out of that. Instead of dying in 2, it might be 3, it might be 4, depending on what the play is this turn.
In addition, Giant Chimera, I think, was only just drawn, I think, 1 or 2 turns ago. So it's not going to have many spell boosts. It doesn't mean Marmot has lethal just yet, but it does mean Bad has to stop for a second. Which also means that the OTK is not going to be ready in the next, it's kind of funny to call it an OTK, because usually Dreadsea and Dragon is just simply going to be enough. But especially when Urd is the main activator for it, or the enabler for it, it's just, if she can't find one method of just getting that damage in yet, then she's in this situation where it's her time left in the game is already taken down, and she can't really progress her game plan much.
Oh, wow. Looks like she's going to go for it anyway.
I guess evolving it face means that she is daring Marmot to have it. Unfortunately, we know that he does. Saying that if she... Yeah, I think she's just claiming, if you don't have it now, then I'm just going to set up my lethal for next turn. She probably feels that she doesn't actually have a solid way to get that damage in later, like Sybil now, trade, be safe, and then hit face, and then combo.
I don't mind this line of play from Bad. It might seem like we know, that the game's just over because of hand, like, Bad, why did you do this? But in Bad's shoes, I think the way you explained it is perfectly right. Do I really want to sit around for a couple extra turns and not kill them, or do I want to just take my chance now and hope they don't have the D shift? And, that's one of those coin flippy things, I did it. I took the chance. It backfired on me, but I think she feels okay with that choice.
I agree with it a lot, because, their opponent's playing D-Shift. You've seen them get quite a few spell boosts already. Even if you don't know what's exactly in their hand, your decision is really, do I give them another turn and do my combo another turn after that? Or do I stake it all on, you bricked, and I didn't, so I'm going to go as early as I can into my combo. Unfortunate it worked out that way.
Yeah, I agree. And heads up play by Best Marmot on evoing the Chimera there to actually put Bad in a bad position where Breath of the Salamander couldn't just kill it by itself. So really good play from both players that last game. I like that.
Right. I wanted to actually add to that. It was a beautiful evolve on the Chimera. It gets it out of the range of most of Dragon's removal, at least that it can just feel free to spend. He knew that she didn't want to spend a enhanced Breath of the Salamander on it, so both dodges removal and set up his own lethal with D-Shift the next turn.
So, getting into this matchup, this is interesting because in my mind, OTK Roach has always had a slight edge in the Dragon matchup, but because of the combo nature of Dragon now being able to go off on similar turns as Forest, I'm not really sure anymore. I think this just comes down to how good the draws are.
Yeah, I was about to mention that my experience with this in the past is that Forest gets this matchup every single time, but in the past, Dragon did not also have 16 damage on what could potentially just be about like turn 6 or 7.
Right, exactly. So I think this, in my mind, is like the actual OTK Roach Mirror if we don't get to see it. This is basically who can accumulate lethal the fastest and who can get the early poke damage in.
So it seems like things are going well so far in Bad's position anyways. Has already managed to ramp quite a bit and is on the play, so she's rapidly accelerating towards her game plan. Whereas Marmot has the beginning of a setup with Elven Princess Mage next turn, but I like this Dragoon Scyther a lot because it denies a good trade-off of her.
That's right. Elven Princess Mage, if Marmot wants to use it, will have to sacrifice itself or just leave it in play and basically the same end result if Bad wants to remove the Elven Princess Mage. Or an option for an extra 2 damage. So yeah, playing the Scyther there really, really good. Especially against Forest, what you talked about before the match, their Evo turns. Elven Princess Mages, their Finas, those turns are big stop turns. If you can navigate those turns very well, it makes it so that Forest has to do a lot of different things than it wants to do on those turns.
That said, I think that's a really interesting turn for Marmot there is instead of developing that evolve turn, he instead just chooses to develop and look for more pieces. So he's actually been just, or Bad's line of play actually just completely swerved him away from that. And he's going to probably try in the next few turns to look for another way to reach it, which in turn gives Bad a lot more time to ramp towards her own win condition.
Right. Now, if you're Bad, do you trade here or do you go face? What are you thinking?
I think I absolutely go face here. In fact, I would dare say she evolves face. Right.
Boom.
Right. That is to say, yeah, all she needs is an Erd right now, and she already off of that hit alone has a guaranteed setup for lethal once she hits 10 play points.
That's true. And then this will be on best Marmot if he's slow enough to the combo. It looks like he's pretty close. So he's got the Elven Princess Mage. He's got all of his roaches. Doesn't even really need a bounce at this point, just cheap spells. And he's got the Spring Green protections, which can help. Ooh.
Which is interesting. I was about to say, I don't even imagine he trades here. But at this point, probably doesn't want to take any more damage, though. What's probably going to be very scary and hanging upon Marmot's mind here is that he's already been put into lethal range for once Bad gets the play points.
Right, and I think Best Marmot feels that. That's why we see the Roach coming down for additional poke. Now, it's interesting to me that he uses one of the Roaches here. He doesn't have a bounce effect in his hand. He does have the Ancient Elf, but not a cheap one like an Airbound Barrage or a Nature's Guidance to actually full combo with 2 Roaches. So giving one up could be very telling of him feeling very pressured right now.
Right. At the same time, it could even also highlight that he feels he's not going to have the actual time to set up any kind of 3-Roach combo later. He says, I only need 2. That's going to be enough. Or at least it has to be enough for me later.
Yeah, now it's a have to. And it's fine against these Dragon decks now because generally speaking, you only need 2 with a full combo in the later turns. But you might not get to those later turns. So throwing the Roach might have given away a turn that he could have pressed for a lethal, maybe next turn, right before Bad gets to 10. But with only 2 Roaches and without a bounce, it's going to be a lot harder at this point.
Meanwhile, it seems like if he's been playing for anything this entire game, I think that Roach tells us he just wanted to get the poke in because he's never going to get the chance again, but he still doesn't have the pieces for the combo after that. Whereas Bad, at this point, I think, has established enough dominance of the board with Dragoon Scythers alone, actually. They're doing so much to just lock out Marmot's options that she can just get in enough damage to not need Erd. I think coming up soon, she can actually just go Dread Sea into Genesis Zeus, and that being 12 is enough if ILS were to survive here.
That's true. And even if it's not enough, putting a Zeus in play on a combo turn for Roach makes it very hard to get around. Usually you have to stop for a turn, Dance of Death it, and then combo off the next turn, but there isn't going to be that kind of time.
I've got to take a break.
Onto the side of that, did you see how difficult that decision was for Marmot to make of, do I give up my entire body and get rid of Dragoon Scyther, or do I give Bad 10 play points for her combo to get 4 damage off the board?
Right. And this turn is just disgusting. Playing a Zeus and a Genesis Dragon alongside of a 7/7 in a single turn, we're talking about 30 play points worth of value in a single turn.
So Cassiopeia would need like a 30-card hand to actually clear all of this?
Yeah. I think Cassiopeia is a little overwhelmed at the moment. Dragons and gods and queens, I don't know if I can do it.
Well, she's gonna try. Got a little bit of chip damage in there.
I lost.
And that'll be the game. So now we get to see the much anticipated Roach versus Roach mirror.
Something I actually find really funny about that is I noticed something kind of peculiar about Marmot's list is a card I don't see many people use. He drew it that turn, and it's in like the best situation I think you could even really find it with Pixie Mischief. If a person runs Pixie Mischief, it's probably with the intention to remove or steal tempo away from someone for playing something that's a huge commitment like Zeus or otherwise. But in that case, where Bad has already just gone off of their combo, suddenly a class you'd think might be a bit vulnerable to it, it just completely shrugs it off. It's just not nearly enough.
Oh, you want to let me play my Zeus again? You got it. You got it. Now, I will say that Pixie Mischief, I feel, is much better than people are giving it credit for, especially right now because of the way the tempo-oriented games go. Especially because you have cards like Spring Gear and Protection, Wood of Brambles, just so many cards to combo with it, and to gain tempo, just to get an extra turn or two in the mid-game or the early game. I think that people only run one of it, and not everybody runs one copy of it anymore. A lot of lists don't even run it anymore, and I feel like that number should be at least 2, maybe even 3 in some circumstances. I'm really high on that card right now, but can't speak for everyone.
It's a really interesting card if you also consider that, I mean, now that we're actually talking about it, it's hitting me that both of these decks have such an absurd amount of bounce in them, carrying both Airbound Barrage as a playset of 3, Nature's Guidance as a playset of 3, and both of them also run 3 Ancient Elves. It's just that Marmot goes above and beyond to also include 2 copies of Pixie Mischief.
Yeah, and I love it. I love it. More tempo is great. I mean, think about all the decks that you're really scared about, right? Like, Atomy could beat you before you have time to do anything, and we saw what Pixie Mischief can do against that card. Especially, it basically just destroys the game. It's just really good against every big tempo play that decks have. You know what I mean? Like, even against D-Ship, bouncing a Chimera might seem really bad, but it costs 9 again when it bounces to their hand, or, you know, anything, just to stop any kind of tempo on whatever turn. Bouncing cards is great, and for 2 play points, I think it's really good.
If anything, I think Pixie Mischief was like a really, really interesting card, an answer Forest had to a lot of things that a lot of people didn't explore. And unfortunately, I think it's going out. I don't think it's a basic card when the rotations happen, but at the very least, we do get to see Marmot Track represented here.
That's true. All right, so now we have the Battle of the Brambles. Of course, for those of you who are new to Wood of Brambles, if it is your turn, you are the active player, your clashes go off first. So being the person who can attack with it on their turn has advantage, and I think that is in Bad's favor at the moment.
Absolutely. In fact, I think Marmot was in a really tough position there on what he even does to this board, because especially if your board is empty and your opponent has a Wood of Brambles that's just been ticking, as you can see here how it works. No matter how protected your own fairies are, the best he can do is play 3 and give up 2 of them, accepting that he'll at least have 1 left on board afterwards.
Right. Now, it's interesting to play, I mean, you do it because it's defense, right? You play those 2 fairies because you don't want to take the 2 damage. But now he's gotten rid of 1-cost cards in his hand. He's only got the 1 fairy left and a Nature's Guidance, which might make it a little bit harder in the next couple turns if he wants to get that Tia down, or if he wants to do anything in multiples on his turn. So he gave up a lot of advantage for his life points there, I think.
Yeah, and in addition to that, trading here becomes no easier. Another very, very strong quality of Wood of Brambles is just the nature of a countdown amulet is that it doesn't tick until your turn comes. So even after its active duration has ended for that player, there's still 1 more turn where your opponent is protected by it. So this fairy still only has 1 option of attack. But I find it really interesting, along with what you said as well. He threw away all of his 1 costs, but he doesn't have a backup plan. He doesn't have an Elven Princess Mage, or a Fina, or anything like that to restore that.
That's right, and he elected not to play the fairy in hand now. I believe that's just so he can save it for combo turns, but now it means that he's giving up board position. So it's kind of like this tug of war that we're seeing for board, and I think Best Marmot isn't doing necessarily the wrong thing. It's more just, I feel like he's giving up the board while also giving up card advantage over the course of a couple turns. It might not matter in the end game because, of course, at the very heart of this matchup, it's who can combo faster, but these little incremental damage pieces in the mid game really matter for Roach damage.
Actually reaching that increment of 20 damage off of Roach is a really difficult task, and I think a lot of people sometimes underestimate it. As I think the most common intervals of damage for Roach are about 14 or otherwise, which Marmot is approaching now. But something I find really interesting with how this game's going out is both of us reacted to Rainu's question like on impulse when he asked, do you go first or second? Just immediately. Second, obviously. Elven Princess Mage, need more evolves. But there's something I didn't consider because it's relatively new. If you go first, and Ban has demonstrated this, even if both of you open Wood of Brambles, you're the
That's
one who
true.
gets the last laugh on it.
That's true. That's true. Wood of Brambles does a lot of work if you're on the play. So that is kind of like the extra wild card in this matchup. If you're on the play and you get Wood of Brambles, you have a slight advantage in the early game. Absolutely.
Mhm. You can see now it's actually dismantling Marmot's evolve point advantage where he's on the draw, because he's lost so much tempo off of it, to the point that he even looks like he's still recovering beyond 2 evolve points trying to get it back, that I think Bad is just going to run away with this one.
I think so as well. Bad already has 2 roaches in hand. She has an Angelic Snipe for extra combo damage, which I love. Angelic Snipe, I would never leave home without it when I'm playing OTK Roach, but I see a lot of players like not to run that card as well. She doesn't have a bounce at the moment, but she does have all this damage in play already that she's dealing.
Right, and it's not as though Forest really has a wealth of options for tempo swinging. Cassiopeia probably the best of them, though.
And this is the swing turn. So how much damage can she do out of hand at the moment? She can cast 4, 5, 6, 7. So she can cast 3. So that's 4, 5, 9, 10 damage this turn. So not quite lethal.
There's no bounce in hand, which is kind of unfortunate, or at least not that I'm squinting at. But the 2-0 cost fairies and the Angelic Snipe definitely threaten it soon.
Oh, actually, I miscounted. I forgot that she had that many. So she can play 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is 11, 12 damage. She has 12 damage this turn, so I miscounted. So she's actually almost there. But what that does mean is that Dance of Death can come down right now and pretty much just set up for a guaranteed lethal next turn.
Though Marmot can respond to it by setting up Aaron afterwards, and then left without Dance of Death. I guess as we mentioned before the game, the role that Aaron really plays in this matchup is if Marmot's that behind here, he did manage to get a tempo swing, so he's not outright dying right now. But because he has Aaron, he still gets just a little bit more time. Now it comes down to a choice of whether he wants to Aaron or commit his hand into a Tia here, but I imagine Aaron's a lot more reasonable of a way to recover some time, as opposed to dumping his roach-related resources.
Well, because he just drew an Ancient Elf, I think that Tia just became an actual option. And I think that's what Marmot's considering right now. It gets to put up a ward, he gets to fill up the board, and if things go awry, he can scoop it all back up and maybe even replay that Tia on a following turn. So I actually really like this. This will set up, like, when you're playing in this mirror and you're behind, it's wards every single turn until you can't do it anymore. So this will set up this play. If Bad doesn't deal with the Crystalia Aaron, then Ancient Elf can come down as another ward, and then Tia can come down on the following turn for another ward, and then you have Aaron, and then you just do this endgame of non-stop wards, and I really like it.
I actually think Marmot's actually in a perfectly fine position. He's gonna probably start throwing this back to the good old classic way Forest used to play, where it just recycles Tia infinitely. He has an Ancient Elf to do it first. Well, that's probably not this turn. If he's willing to give up a Nature's Guidance.
Ooh, interesting. I didn't expect this play. Because this again puts Crystalia Aaron in trouble. She can be removed. I think Bad almost, I wouldn't call it a misplay, but overlooking the fact that Tia could come back to hand. You never really want that to happen, and now Marmot's saying, you know what? Deal with her. I'm going to give you one more chance.
Even pre-evolving the Aaron, I think that is definitely smelling out some fear from Marmot of large combo happening anytime soon. But it does leave Tia herself pretty vulnerable if Bad is willing to, well, I suppose Sylvan Justice is a pretty straightforward way to get rid of it.
Yeah.
But how does she deal with the 6/8?
That's tough. Like, the pre-evo here is basically saying, you know what, Bad? You don't have another Dance of Death. I dare you. Okay? And she doesn't, which makes it really hard to deal with. So you're at least going to have to get rid of a Roach here, I think. So if you could do Sylvan Justice, that's 1. You can play Angelic Snipe, that's 2. And then you don't really want to play your fairies is the problem. You start playing those fairies, it's rough. But she does have a fairy circle. I'm going to let her figure this one out. There's a lot of math in there. I'm 100% positive she can deal with this Aaron. It just depends on how many resources she wants to give up to do it.
Right. I think she has enough of an abundance where she can do it, though I might try to find a way to throw in maybe the Sylvan Justice, the fairy from it, maybe activate the fairy circle and just continue to work up until Roach is able to deal the remaining remainder of maybe 5, maybe give up the Angelic Snipe here. But what makes this turn really tricky, I think, is that she needs to get rid of this Tia as well, or at least seeing Marmot's hand tells us that.
The one thing that Best Marmot did present here, like I said, with playing the Aaron, it unfortunately means that there isn't going to be this onslaught of wards anymore. He essentially put out 2 to be killed this turn. Oh, wait a minute. It looks like she's going for lethal.
She's 1 off if that's the case.
Ooh. She's putting the pressure on, though. Okay. I didn't expect this play.
That's so in. I mean, she doesn't have a follow-up to that. You see her hand. It's a vanilla 3/4 at this point, which is one of the unfortunate parts of Elven Princess Mage. And then it's just fairies. Even if she had an evolve, it would still just be fairies. So she's just looking to grind out 1 more hit, but she did leave a Tia alive against the class of returning followers to hand.
And just in case, Best Marmot did draw another Tia. So even if that Tia was dealt with, he would have had another one in time. And I think this game is going to get progressively rougher for Bad unless she can draw an Angelic Snipe. Angelic Snipe is a lethal card at the moment.
So, okay, there are 3 Angelic Snipes in Bad's deck. There's also another Dance of Death. So we're constantly, we're looking for just 3 bombs right now. The roaches are all used up. They're basically time bombs at this point. There's 3 in the deck. If she draws 1, it's over.
Ooh. It's every card now. It's just like, oh my goodness. But Bad only has this draw, maybe next draw, but I don't think so. I'm pretty sure that she's dead this following turn. I mean, there's 11 staring at her on the board. There's 2 roaches and a Nature's Guidance in hand with a fairy circle. I'm pretty sure she's dead. Yeah,
I think that's actually it, because this deck is one of those decks that does not have any alternative to Goblin Mage. There's no Elfchild May, nothing like that. It only pulls Roach. Seeing all 3, it's just a 2/2 now. So her hand is just vanillas and fairies. She can't deal with any bodies, and Marmot just swings face and just spends his own roaches.
So you know what? Marmot doing that pre-evo on the Aaron scared Bad enough to where she's like, I don't have any more time. I need to get him to 1 now, and played right into Best Marmot's hand of just having plenty of wards and then just pushing for lethal leisurely.
To be honest, I don't even think Marmot needs the roaches at this point. I think, like, his deck has already done such a good job of just staying defensive that he could even, assuming he didn't have them or no burst from hand, I think he could just continue to play out this just with the resources of bouncing and playing wards, and then assuming Bad doesn't top deck that miracle of 1 damage.
But see, you can't ever give him a card, Mofu. You know this. I know you know this. Never give your opponent a card, ever.
Right.
Yeah. 1 card could mean doom always. Don't let him have it. I don't think Best Marmot's going to allow it.
Absolutely. The roaches are definitely in this turn. Even with limited board space, that's still a very, very clear path for him. The roach bounce, roach, it's still excessively overlethal. But yeah, as we were talking about this matchup before, I think something we missed, or at least was demonstrated here, is the wards in each deck are such an important part of the whole matchup.
Absolutely.
Marmot.
Best Marmot. I'm going to give Best Marmot a clap. Getting on the board.
It was
give
actually,
our man some love.
It was definitely a really good line of play. Now, there were a few things that happened in there. I think, for one, Bad never drew a single bounce, which I think is very tough, especially in scenarios like that. Typically, I think wards are very difficult for Forestcraft players to chew through, especially when they're playing Roach. But it is actually astounding that Airbound Barrage and none of the other Dance of Deaths were drawn, and none of the bombs at the end of the turn, and that's a lot of opportunity to get someone to win you the game there.
And she had a Glimmering Wings on turn 4, like just perfectly active. I mean, she drew a lot of cards. She just didn't get that 1 extra piece she needed. And like we said, Angelic Snipe, Dance of Death, I mean, a bounce spell in the earlier game, I mean, she would have had it.
You know what card would have been really useful that game for her? Pixie Mischief.
Pixie Mischief for sure.
Yes.
And this is why it's actually why I'm such a fan of Airbound Barrage, right? Because it both gives you that bounce for that 1 play point. That 3 damage changes you from I have to use a Roach to, oh, maybe I don't, you know, and then you get the bounce and the extra damage and the cards played. Just such an interesting scenario, but I think Best Marmot actually played around his outs very well in that game. Even at 1 health remaining, I think he made the right play, and that's actually awesome to see.
And he didn't look like he was under pressure at all. He's just like, you know what, I have my wards, I'm good, everything's fine, we got this, and he took it home. I'm proud of him. I'm glad he got up there.
Crystalia Tia making another appearance here, and we haven't seen her in quite a while, but showing just how strong she can be. Let's take a look at the standings to see the scoreline now. Best Marmot getting on the board 2-2, while Bad gets pushed down to 1-3. And of course, that leaves us in an interesting state here where Best Marmot is in the middle of the pack and Bad falls down to the bottom end of the group there. Now, I think there is a scenario where if you go 2-3, you can end up being tied for the 3rd place spot, I believe. I believe that is an outcome that could happen, but that would require either Fatina Essia or, I didn't catch the last name there, unfortunately, to lose all the rest of their matches, which...
We've seen it. We've seen some crazy times go on in this round robin, so I wouldn't put it past any of our players to get there.
Yeah, so we'll see how the group plays out, but it's definitely a tense time now. 4th week here. There's only 1 more week left, so there's not that many more games to play. Hey, just a little message before we continue on with the tournament. I want to let you guys know that you can join our Discord through a Twitch panel link. So if you're watching on Twitch right now, or if you're watching the VOD on YouTube or something like that, twitch.tv/NGE, then go to the panel and give it a click, and that'll join the Shadowverse Open Discord. So go ahead and do that. Do that right now. Right now. And then
Make haste.
Yeah, make haste. Make haste.
Get
so,
there.
Let's talk about our next match here. Kionis versus Essia. Kionis versus Essia. Now this is going to be a tough one to call for me because I feel like these two players were kind of the 2 players that were of the most even skill level, I think, in the last season. Right, in season 2, both Kionis and Essia had very good showings, and then very tough losses as well. And they've both banned out each other's Runecraft decks, which leaves Dragon Haven and Forest Dragon. Now, Exo, Havencraft, how successful is this in your mind? Is this going to be a weakness for Kionis, or is this going to help them in this matchup? What do you think?
I feel like that is the thing that Kionis is going to get pressed on. He's essentially playing Seraph against what we just saw, an OTK Roach deck and a Ramp Dragon deck that aims to combo. So I think Seraph is still a liability. I don't think that's changed. I know we've talked about it a lot, just Seraph in general and like what it can do essentially for your opponent. And it's really just a button to press. It's like, oh, okay, I can play against Seraph. I have 3 combo decks. I'm ready.
Well, let's take a look at the Haven deck that Kionis is bringing. Kind of dissect it a little bit. The card that I want to focus on is actually quite an old card, but I think for some of the newer viewers, it'd be good to look at it. I think it's been one of the key cards for Havencraft just in general for the longest time. Priest of the Cudgel. Now, this guy is mad, right? If you look at it, look at that evolved art. Look how mad he is. Okay.
Local man sees your weakness.
That's right.
In the normal art, he's kind of normal, you know, bald priest guy. In the evolved art, he puts the hat on, and he just starts going ham, shaking his cudgel. Mofu, tell me a little bit about this guy.
I think Priest of the Cudgel may actually be the most memorable card for a lot of experienced players, because back in like the Darkness Evolved era, when Haven was actually played a lot, this card was actually just the name of going second. If you went first versus Haven, you had to have a fantastic opener, or you probably just completely lost your board to him. Or you were like swung upon so hard by that cudgel that you just couldn't come back from it. Nowadays, it's really interesting to see how he still tries to hold up. The game's gotten a lot faster, there's a lot more followers and a lot larger bodies on board by the time you get to him, but he's still solid, he's still a core part of a lot of Haven decks, so I'm not surprised to see him showing up.
And in this particular list, Seraph, as Exodium mentioned, Priest of the Cudgel, I mean, as with most kind of late game combo-oriented decks, kind of surviving that mid-game is super important, so Cudgel helps that game plan here. But as we saw just in the last match, things like ward are so important. And there's not a lot of big beefy wards here. We don't see things like the Cleric Lancer. We do see a few unique cards, maybe I'll call them, in this deck. What do you think about its chances up against what Essia has to offer, Exo?
Well, he's not doing anything crazy like Dark Johnning with his early game of Heavenly Hounds and Snow White and Beast Calarias to potentially end the game before a combo deck can get to its end game. So really, he's just playing a very straightforward, hard control Seraph deck, and he's doing it against two decks that can win before turn 9. So even if he does have a chance to play Seraph, his defenses are totally down, and just like you said, Rainey, there aren't any wards to stop any of these combos from really happening. So I think this is going to be the pressure point that Essie is going to use, and I think he's going to be able to break through it.
So things definitely look grim in this format, right? When you have one deck that opens itself to a particular weakness, and your opponent makes the read and does what Essia has done and brings just a whole bunch of lineups to bully it, that puts you in a tough situation. On the flip side, let's consider this for a moment. If Kionis does happen to run away with a win on his Havencraft deck, is his alternative a good enough matchup against the other decks that Essia has to offer? Is there an out for Kionis here?
I think so, yeah. Mofu, talk to us about Dragon in general, right? Dragon always has a good chance.
Yeah, I think Dragon is the one class you can just never discredit. Though something interesting is that Kionis has elected to bring a sort of a traditional style neutral ramp dragon, but I think that list has been good ever since it was first even invented with the arrival of Sahagweel. I think it'll do just fine versus like combo decks, control decks, the like. It's perfectly able to close out games. It's got a lot of win conditions. But for now, I think we need to actually focus really hard on Seraph, because I think that is where Kionis' entire chance to win lies.
And I think Kionis understands that too. We see him playing it first. He knows he has to get a win with it, and if he can, then the matchup swings right back into a 50-50, and that's exactly what he needs to do.
Well, so if you are Kionis in this, just piloting this deck, and like I personally have never once played Seraph in my life. I've never even had a copy of it. That may or may not be true. I might have just piled it and forgotten. But so, with my lack of experience, what are you looking for when you play Seraph? What kind of opener?
So Seraph, really, the opener doesn't really matter. It's a completely reactive deck for as long as you can possibly be. And then you just try to set up your amulets to pop on the same turn as you would want to play Seraph, so that you can actually have some followers in play to use while you basically take up your entire 8th turn or 9th turn or whatever it might be with Seraph. Because Seraph, of course, is a countdown amulet that cannot evolve. It doesn't kill anything when it comes into play. So you're basically just saying, I'm going to beat you next turn, but I'm not doing anything this turn. And it's a very risky play. So the early game, it's just finish off my opponent's followers as often as I can, and then just set up my amulets for the late game so I can actually play my Seraph.
If that's the case, then I think one thing a lot of people, such as I, ignorant and humble players who have never touched Seraph before, don't know about this deck, is how keenly do you have to save combo pieces? We saw him use Hollowed Dogma after an area there, which is probably his best bet at just developing early board dominance, which, as you mentioned, this deck doesn't use early board dominance for pressure at all. It just wants to trade in bodies and not take damage. But, that being the case, using Hollowed Dogma like that, holding things like Healing Prayer, how many do you need to, or like, at what point in the game do you really need to start holding them, and how many do you just have to make sure you never go past?
I don't know if there's ever really a reason to not just do the best thing that you can do on your turn. You play enough amulet countdown removal cards so that you don't really have to worry about it. And you play cards like Healing Prayer so that you can heal in certain parts of the game, like say against a Roach combo decks, to know that they can't OTK you if you've counted all the cards that they have in their hand, their 0 cost and all that kind of stuff. So, but once you start getting close to, if you have Seraph in hand and you know you can go off on turn 9, you generally want to keep around 2, especially if you have a Hollowed Dogma, because it'll draw you a card, right? So as long as you can try to get to that 3 on the 9th turn to combo off, I think you're fine, but I wouldn't stress too much holding all of your combo pieces if you really need to play those cards.
It makes a lot of sense, considering even right now we're already seeing this is not an amulet light deck despite running Seraph. It even has like Globe of the Starways, which searches what one would ideally say Seraph. Like the win condition, you always have it. But even then, there's so many important amulets to hold on to, like Tribunal, Sacred Plea. Basically, this whole class, I guess to no one's surprise, is geared around amulets which win back tempo, as we see here with Tea Time.
Absolutely. And it's all about the tempo game with the amulets. I mean, even Healing Prayer, right? Like, it's a tempo card. You heal yourself, you might be able to pop card draw, you might be able to pop another Tin Soldier out, or a Beast Call Aria, something like that. So it's all just to out-tempo your opponent until you play Seraph, and then they gain all the tempo back, and hopefully you don't lose.
Mhm. So I guess if that's really just the game plan we're going to be seeing here, then I guess it's like, if we focus on what Essia is working on here, then we find he's at a very awkward turn. I tried seeing that it looked like it would be a super advantageous play to be able to just ignore Kionis' damage. Who cares how many times this Tin Soldier hits me? It needs to hit me 4 times before I'll die. There's no burst in the deck. But his hand is full. So playing another Princess Mage makes little sense. It looks like he just goes for Rhinoceroach Ancient Elf here.
Yep. And this is a type of attack that we expect from Forest if they are playing Ancient Elf. And this also really makes you feel good that you are playing cards like Healing Prayer, because you can essentially just negate everything that Essie is trying to do this turn.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't even necessarily have to use it this turn. You know what I mean? He can wait until he has more amulets in play, get more advantage off of it. He knows he's not going to lose next turn. So I think it feels just fine with this.
Ooh. And that's a very interesting choice to evolve it. Tries to cash in damage. That actually places a very high amount of emphasis on trying to get rid of the Tin Soldier. It almost seems as though he's afraid of it.
Yeah.
In that he has a Cassiopeia in hand, and that threatens 8 damage spread across things. And Seraph, as a deck, is not really a very follower-heavy list. You don't imagine he would pop like a area again on the turn that he plays it. So I find that to be a really interesting evolve.
I like this too, because what it does set up is if Kionis wants to play another something like a March Hare's Tea Time, that Cassiopeia will be able to actually take out both. So he doesn't have to worry about pressure. And that's exactly what a combo deck would want to do, right? Extend the game for that 1 extra turn, because Essia knows he has at least until turn 9 in which he's going to lose. So spreading out these turns right now feels really good.
Right, and even now, area, Tea Time on board, but again, as I already kind of mentioned earlier, that hit face for 5 damage, Essia might as well still be at full health. That's kind of the nature of alternate win condition decks like Seraph, where if it really is just not interested in your opponent's life total at all, damage completely doesn't matter. And so I'm surprised actually still that he went for, you already justified, he went for the play to try to keep Kionis' board clear, but I think it doesn't really afford that much attention.
I don't think so either. Like, I personally probably wouldn't have used an Evo point like that, but I can see where Essie is at, because he has 2 Cassiopeias. He knows he's going to be able to keep the board clear. And he doesn't feel like he needs the extra Evo because he's playing against Seraph. I think he knows that if he can get to a certain point, he's just going to win the game. However, in saying that, not having an Evo point for this turn and or not having it for a combo damage turn might actually hurt him in the long run. So we'll see.
Right. Now, that I found to be a really interesting turn. Kionis just simply tossed out his Healing Prayers to develop his board as much as possible, which goes completely like on the opposite of what I described his game plan would be. I was thinking he doesn't worry about followers at all as long as he's at full defense, but that play almost feels like he's just trying to win the game with board.
Right, and this is kind of the trap that I find Seraph fall into. So, like, Seraph can just win with followers. In most cases, it does just do that. It's a control deck. As long as you can control the game, a lot of times it doesn't matter what followers you have. They'll just kind of bowl over your opponent as you're dealing with everything that they have. The problem with Seraph is that it doesn't really have any backup to the plan. So, like, even if it pushes all of this face damage, even if it presents this big board, it can't really do it turn after turn. So if you can stop their, like, 1 onslaught, then you put them right back on the Seraph plan. And as we see, Kionis doesn't even have Seraph. That's why we saw him so easily use all of his countdown removals. And now he's just in a really bad spot. He's just got a deck that doesn't really do anything or present any kind of a lethal in any timely fashion here.
And in addition to that, I guess you originally had described this as a very reactive deck, and now I'm really seeing it. To extrapolate upon how little pressure it really presents, you see this hand is fully reactive, but that is a problem with the nature of very reactive decks, is that Essia's board right here is not difficult for really most decks in Shadowverse to deal with. You do have to remove the attacker, but in a deck that tries to pack as much efficient and powerful, answer everything that it possibly can, removal such as Themis or Holy Sentinel to try to go wide, T-time to kill 2 things, you don't really want to actually commit any of these things here.
And like Rainey said before the game even started, without any wards in hand, Kionis is just praying every single turn that lethal just doesn't happen. He doesn't really have a defense against it, so he's just like, I'm at 20, that's the best thing I can do is just keep myself at full health to try to stall out the combo for as long as possible. And he's got the time, which is good. Estia doesn't have full combo in hand, so he's got some time here.
At any rate, Nature's Guidance and Airbound Barrage in hand is probably going to get Estia pretty close. Still only 1 Roach in hand, but we just saw Kionis evolve face with Tin Soldier in trade. I think
right.
I think he's completely abandoned the Seraph plan with that.
Yeah, I think he has to. Without any countdown removals in hand, without any Seraph in hand, he's just going to rely on his card draw to kind of get him there. Estia just has really great plays here, though. He can almost full combo here with just a single Roach and just Airbound Barrage to pick it back up and kill the Tin Soldier, not really worry about the Snow White. And then just keep waiting for his combo. I mean, he can do a lot of poke here, and I think he should.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, also considering his poke sticks now if he goes for it. He actually chooses not to and develops an Aaron instead. I actually really like that.
Yeah, it's perfectly fine. Getting your Evo point back's not bad. Putting up something that your opponent can't really deal with. However, the reason why I kind of like the poke option is because it could set up a lethal faster, and if he does this play, it could open up a world where Tribunal comes down, you take 6, and then he plays another threat, and then he might be threatening lethal on the following turn. Fortunately for Estia, Kionis does not have the hard removal for it.
Something I also find worth mentioning, though, like with that play, he does manage to develop a couple of resources he can use for an OTK later. But if he went for poke, he knows I think the only healing that's actually in this Seraph list is the healing prayers, unless I'm overlooking something obvious. No, I think it is. That being the case, he has no evolves left for Heavenly Hound to even create a barrier or a ward of any kind. So that more or less just sets up any damage that he puts down is going to be permanent.
Let's see, is this a lethal setup? We've got 4 damage, we've got a bounce.
It's going to be
6 damage, and then
bounce into 8 evolve.
8 evolve.
Yeah.
That's it. So never mind what I was saying. Essia's like, I know when I have lethal, bro. Turn 9, full 20 damage, easy stuff.
Yeah. Who needs poke, actually? He saw that a long time ago, and that is actually really, like, that is the kind of play from Roach you see that divides someone who just kind of picks up the tech because they know it's strong, and someone who's definitely played it for a long time, because that was invisible to me. I have absolutely no expertise counting Roach damage with only 1 Roach, but he saw it, and that's really impressive.
So things to know if you guys are wanting to pick up Roach yourselves in the future is always count your bounce spells and always count your Roaches as your full play point plays, right? So like every Roach is 3 essentially that you want to play, because you have to play it, bounce it, and then replay it, right? Except for your first Roach, which costs 2. So as long as you can count your play points appropriately, all you have to do for the rest of the turn is just count how many spells you can cast before your Roaches. And then right on. And you get them. And like you said, it separates the good from the bad, because if you know you have lethal on 9 without doing any poke damage, then his play becomes correct, right? Whereas if he didn't have lethal damage, maybe it's not correct, and so on and so forth for every individual turn. Do I need to do poke here? Do I not? Do I have lethal on this turn? Do I not? So, absolutely.
And it can become really hard for your opponents to read as well, because Kionis, for all he knows, he's playing against Roach combo, but he doesn't see a Roach all game until about he sees 1 Roach come out early on and get bounced, and that's it. He never takes another point of damage until he's dead.
Right, and like you said, that's super hard, right? Like if you're at 16, you know that they could be getting there, that kind of thing. But if you're at 20, maybe you play this turn, you're like, you know what, they don't have it yet, and I'm just going to play out a tempo turn, and then they have it, right? So like you said, it's just way harder to read when your opponent's at 20, or when you're at 20 rather, and it just makes all of your plays just like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what I need to do this turn.
It can be a lot easier to count in a matchup like the one we're heading into now, where you know you're going to get hit twice by a Genesis Dragon, and maybe they evolve once. That's it. It's 16 maximum. Much more clean, but I think, as we mentioned before, this is actually like Kionis' worst spot he could be in. He needs to win this with Seraph, and it's not exactly the easiest matchup ever. I don't think he can ever win against Dragon if he goes with this, or if he's forced into the same plan as last game, where he just has to try to win with tempo.
Absolutely. And so one thing I actually want to talk to you about Seraph, because we've seen different iterations of it over the last couple weeks. Do you think it's right to go with the full amulet package, with the globes, with the sacred pleas, with the beast calls and all that stuff? We also saw Bottles' version where it was just like globe of stairways and Seraph, so that you can always get your Seraph every single game, and then you get your card draw in other ways.
That's a really tough one, just because like there are a lot of amulets that do so much for Haven that I couldn't imagine gunning them. Namely, Marcher's Tea Time. I think it's really, really smart to be running Tea Time. It put in a lot of work against Forest earlier. But I think there's a point at which it can become pretty excessive, especially if you only run 2 Seraph, and I myself wouldn't dare run 3. I can only imagine that being a disaster.
See, I find it the opposite. On ladder, of course, you'd only want to play 2. You never want to overdraw it against aggro decks, things like that, and D-Shift. Of course, we know D-Shift is rampant on the ladder, and in tournament play. But for tournaments, speak of last game, you only have so many games with your deck. If you don't see your win condition, you might just lose because of it, which is what we saw with Kionis. Playing 3 in a deck that doesn't have an easy way to search it out or guarantee it, I think would have been correct. Unless he was playing just the globe with the Seraph, in which case you only need to play 1 Seraph, right? Because you can just tutor for it. So it's I don't know.
That is actually really true, especially in a tournament format where you know your opponent. There's nothing that can really come out and surprise you. Even if there are bad matchups, you know what you can ban. Then, if not 3 Seraphs, I think it would be correct to run more ways of searching it. Even Prism Priestess or other ways to make sure that you get it every game could help you from having to go into this much less consistent and much harder to pull off game plan of trying to win with tempo in a deck that really isn't built for it.
Right. One of the saving graces of playing as many amulets that Kionis is running is that it can help you a lot versus Dragon. So in these late game turns, if the combo isn't drawn yet and Bahamut's are the plays, you know, just a clear board, create a tempo turn for Essia, something like that, having amulets in play kind of denies that a little bit. I mean, with Tribunals, Beast Call Arias, March Hare's Tea Times, and the like, you can actually give your opponent advantage by playing Bahamut. So in saying that, Kionis can actually make a board where Bahamut isn't a playable card.
Even then, though, I still think the one board where your opponent absolutely does not want to play Bahamut the most is one where you have Seraph on board.
That's true. That's true. And as we see it, there might be another game where he just doesn't draw it.
I feel for him. He's 16 cards in. He has searched with a globe. It is probably very unlikely at this point that he's still not gone into it, but he does have one more Sacred Plea popping off. I think he's going to need to find it soon.
Yeah. Because that's one of the important things. So you asked me before, how many of these amulet countdown removals do you need? You need as much as you know you have access to the Seraph, right? Because if you don't have access to the Seraph, you need to use them more liberally to try to draw into it. If you know you have it, then you know how many you can save and how many you can realistically give away. Without knowing, it makes it really hard.
Right. And it's a completely different... and there's also the case of burning in case you happen to open all of your draw. It's a very different case from a deck like D-Shift, where you just want to find the card early and then it just simply synergizes with spells. That's it.
Yep.
Well, there's the addition of some other things that spell boost like Owl, but when it comes to Seraph, if you don't have the pieces to pop it, then you are passing turns where you should have lethal just to simply wait it out. And against really any deck with win conditions like we've seen, Roach as a combo deck that's really consistent. This sort of Dragon list, which itself really seems consistent to me. I don't think I've ever seen them like in a long period of time where they just really haven't drawn a part of their like 3-card combo. It just might not make it, or at least it might not be that easy to find Seraph and pop it on a consistent schedule as that.
Not only that, but because of how fast the combo decks are with Dragon, Forest, and D-Shift all being able to win on turn 7, 8, things like that, especially when you're on the draw with Seraph, you have to wait until your turn 9 in order to actually win with the combo. I think it might just be too slow for the format, especially when you're not running a lot of wards to actually back yourself up.
Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, we see he has all the wards in the world that he could possibly want. He's popped his tech card with the Holy Guardian, or Holy Sentinel, that is. He has the evolve points for Heavenly Hound, but I don't think that this is actually a matchup where it's going to be that important.
No, he'll be able to clear it out immediately, and he has access to almost... Well, he has access to his full combo next turn, but he doesn't have access to just win outright. So we'll see how Essia can actually finish this game out while having combo in hand.
Mm-hmm. And in addition, there are times when Ayala isn't really a highly important card. In the situation right here, we saw in a previous game where it's all the damage you need for the combo. But when it really only comes out late game and your opponent was about to hit their 10 play point mark anyway, it's like Kaonis clearing this does not hurt him at all. It basically loses the last words because it's gotten so far into the late game.
That's right. So one other question I have for you, because it's been a long time coming, but Queen of the Dreadsea Dragon over most other forms of dragon. Do you think that players have adopted the style just because it is combo centric? It can win a lot faster, and basically just eschewing a lot of the control that you would normally see in it, like more Bahamut's, more Breath of the Salamanders, Conflagration even, or, Sahas, Lucy's, and Israfils, and things like that. Now we mostly just see Queen of the Dreadsea with Genesis Dragon and Ariat or Erd, that kind of thing. Do you think it's just because of the more aggressive game plan it has, or are there any other reasons that you can think of?
It's an interesting question, because even today, we're going to see a lot of players that have actually chosen not to include it. Mm-hmm. So the livelihood of Dragon without this sort of combo is still, it's not really a question. It's, still working. But as for why so many people are bringing it, I feel like it's because they want to avoid games of Pokerverse. I've talked about it a couple times.
Okay.
It's a term that Japanese players use to refer to when, especially control mirrors, both players are holding 9 cards and neither of them wants to commit anything because the first person to commit something gets it answered. Or these very reactive mirrors. I think you hold such a huge threat over your opponent if they know they have to play around this huge interval of about 16 burst damage, or even a huge tempo swing like we saw earlier with Zeus and Genesis Dragon. If you just have that as an option the entire game, even if you don't have to play it the second you hit 10 play points, then that creates a dynamic where if you have this, how should I put it? It's like, if you have that much damage available, it's interesting he throws it out now, worth mentioning, then your opponent can't let you resolve any damage for the entire game. We see that here, but while I'm having trouble explaining this because I'm also trying to dissect Essia's play.
Yeah. So I'll get into his play. I think his thought is pop the staircase 100% so that I know that I'm going to be drawing my cards at the beginning of my turn. 2, put my opponent into lethal range, and I just popped a staircase. I'm going to get there. And even if I don't get there, I'm still in a really good spot.
Mm-hmm.
Because this will force a Themis. This also forces a non-Seraph play. So something that we haven't really talked about. We kind of hinted at it, but if you can prevent your opponent from playing Seraph every single turn from turn 8 on, it forces them to have to win with followers. And as we said, that's usually not the best case scenario for Haven. So if you can force Haven to not play their Seraph every single turn from turn 8 on, you kind of just run away with the game because they don't really have a backup option. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Right. Though, unfortunately, Kaonis still has yet to, in 2 games and perhaps over 40 draws, has still not seen a single copy of the Seraph.
Ooh, and like a champion, did draw a Genesis Dragon, but Kaonis riding high on the wards that he does have in his deck. So, not dead yet.
Mm-hmm. Very fortunate for Essia there was finding the Breath of the Salamander. Though to finish my thought from before, it's kind of like, even seen here, if even just about 4 to 6 points of damage means your opponent holds a lethal threat with Dreadsea, I think that's what creates such a huge variety of options for the deck. He was able to even just throw it away, knowing Staircase is popped, and then just says, well, if you don't put up a ward every single turn, I'm going to have it with just one of the random combo pieces in my deck.
Right. That's absolutely right. And it's interesting, 6 is an interesting life total, so of course Genesis Dragon gets around that, but a single Forte wouldn't. And there's not really any direct damage in the Dragon deck, so they have to find very specific pieces. So Essia kind of was taking a big gamble by throwing his hand away there, but I still think it was the correct choice because of the Staircase popping. But yeah, I mean, sometimes you just have to leave the stuff up to chance.
Right. I guess.
Or I guess best possible guess would be a better way to put that.
Mm-hmm. One possible way of looking at it is that, as you pointed out, knowing Kionis was going into his 8th turn, he just wanted to say, if you're going to play your win condition here, then I'm just going to kill you for it. Alternatively, if you can't play it, you have to Themis, and then I'm just going to find, ideally, some other way to get the reach.
Right. So calculated. Even better. Calculated guess on, what I need to be doing and how I can win this game. And still no Seraph, so I really think Kionis is just in a bad spot here. I mean, he even if he can gain enough life to survive through this turn, how is he going to win the game?
I think this Tin Soldier is really as far as he's going to be able to push it. As we know, this deck doesn't really have any burst damage. I think Tin Soldier itself is really all that's left. So all SCA needs to do is answer that, and then if he can pull an answer to every body that Kionis plays, and we know Seraph doesn't run many, then there's no way he loses in the end, I think.
That's right. And it feels bad, but I think Essia just has to suck it up and play this Genesis Dragon and attack the the Tin Soldier. I mean, you can gamble again. You can play your Summoner and then hope Rahab can block if you don't draw anything good here, but I think you just have to do it. Yeah.
Right. I mean, he probably understands, if that Princess Snow White can hit my Rahab, then really anything in this entire deck is going to finish off the rest of it.
Right. Ooh. Okay. But as we said, because he drew it so late, he only has 1 countdown removal in the Star Tour in his hand, so he won't even be able to win with it over the course of this turn and next turn. So playing it feels really rough.
Yeah, I actually see a lot of different ways that Kainos could approach this right now. One of which is maybe March Hare's Tea Time. He could actually develop Arya alongside that and trade in the Princess Snow White, but elects to go for the Scripture instead.
See, this is interesting to me. This is very interesting to me. He sets up a board to where Bahamut doesn't do anything, which is amazing. However, he is saying that I'm going to beat you with creatures again, or followers rather, instead of just going for my Seraph plan. He could have actually played Seraph that turn pretty safely, and then just had that be this, okay, this ever-present thing. As long as I can stay alive, I'm going to win. But now he's got to play this follower game. I don't like it. I don't like going for the follower plan here.
I think it was a brilliant way to play around something like Bahamut, but as you can see here, any single option that is too difficult for him to deal with, anything that gives him effective health like Rahab or Sybil, is something he's going to have to stoop down to deal with, and that's still a Seraph that's not ticking, as Estia could draw any number of options here.
Yeah, and I'm not going to say, Kionis has been playing this matchup very well. You know, he's got his own line to this game, and he is sticking to it. And, I mean, I can't fault him for it. Now Bahamut feels really good, actually. So we'll see.
It does, but I'm actually starting to notice SCS might not actually be in as good of a position as I thought. Like, I was writing off of how much advantage he got after popping his combo, but if he continues to only draw small pieces like this, actually I think, yeah, the Rahab's not going to be enough. Well, it's going to be enough to stop for now, but I think it's not going to make up the amount of advantage that Kionis has here.
Nope. It's funny too. Essia really just needs to draw a control card to come back into this game. If he doesn't, he's just going to get overwhelmed by these followers. Exactly what I was talking about. Control doesn't matter what your win condition is. If you draw more cards than your opponent, if you deal with their followers, it doesn't matter what you have left over. These Priests of the Cudgels, unevolved, are scary. Okay, they're super scary.
I'm actually terrified by that swing face. I think that does leave up. Well, we've seen how many Genesis Dragons this game? I feel like only 2. I don't remember if one was discarded by Dreadsea.
Is Essia playing a 3rd Genesis Dragon is the question.
Right. I'll check. Actually, yeah, he only plays 2. So knowing this, yeah, he's playing around that very precisely. He knows, at best, I'm going to have to play around a Zeus here. But he doesn't have the burst left in 1 card to win this.
So yeah, Kionis is in a great spot here. Now, I actually feel like if he played the Seraph, he would have won the game already and kind of taken away any possibility of losing. But drawing that Zeus...
That Zeus changes everything, actually,
so
again.
Good. So good. If Essia wins this, I guarantee you Kionis is going to be kicking himself that he didn't play Seraph when he had the chance to. But if he wins this, he's going to be like, bros, I'm the best.
Made the perfect
okay?
play.
I know how to play Seraph. This is the best. And these are the types of plays that I love. It's all about player flavor versus caster, you know, what we think is right. And you know what? I love those battles. The players are generally right most of the time.
Hard's ever felt them.
Right.
So you can see Essia pretty deep in thought here about when he plays this Zeus, is that hitting face or is it trading?
I think you have to go face. I think if you give up your opportunity to get this 5 damage in, you're just kind of saying, I need to keep drawing to win this game, and I'm at 4. You know what I mean? Essia's at 4 here. I don't think I can do anything else but just go face. I would even go face with both. Probably not, actually. That's a little scary. Five is all you need your opponent to be at, so yeah.
I think there's 2 more cards that Essia is now looking for. If he does set him to 2, which he did, then that means Dragoon Scyther off the top is now also a method of... Oh gosh, that
Tribunal top deck, that's going to be game. Kionis is going to get a win with his Seraph deck. Maybe.
Yeah,
maybe.
I mean, thankfully he didn't trade with the Ayala now, right?
Yeah, thankfully. Maybe that's what his plan was. Yeah, if you're going to Tribunal, you're going to have to 50-50. I'm giving it to him. I think Tribunal's going to work for him here.
Right.
It did. It did. Essia's like, no!
You're a solid fighter.
Well,
See, I already
trade
counted
didn't
that
matter
as a
the
win. Kionis earned that one. He earned that one.
Absolutely. Kionis actually like reached a position where he draws his win condition at long last, and then just wins without it. Through a very, very careful
that's the
and
problem with
calculated.
Seraph, I think. More often than not, is just you're never going to really win with the card.
Right.
And we saw Kionis. He's looking cool as a cucumber right now. Essia, you know, felt a little bad by that one. You know, getting lucked out, as some would say, by this Tribunal. But I don't know. Now we get to see a nice little mirror matchup. But Kionis, I believe, is running the Saha Ramp Dragon, not the combo version.
That's correct, yeah. Now,
So-
This one's for my
something I still find really interesting about last game is I think Essia very confidently slammed his combo right before Kionis would have wanted to play Seraph. Do you think he actually would have been in a much better position, or at least maybe I'm asking this from a biased perspective, because I think he would be, if he had actually held his cards and just continued to play out the control game?
I think he could have put himself in a position to not sacrifice his entire hand, and still keep Seraph from being played. However, I don't think he needed to. I think his line of play was perfectly fine. And it was very minor, I feel like, chance for Kionis to actually come back that game with winning with followers. Because Essia didn't draw any of his control cards. He didn't draw anything that could consistently wipe the board. He didn't draw really anything until that Zeus at the end of the game. To really come back, he had to use his Genesis Dragon on defense. You know what I mean? So just a lot of unfortunate circumstances after that play, I think.
All right. Didn't even see either copy of his Bahamut, which Kionis had played around really, really skillfully.
Right.
Hear the dragons roar.
Sometimes, I mean, I feel like a lot of the players that are playing this Queen deck are just used to just jamming it. You know what I mean? Like, get to 10 as
Right.
fast as possible, jam it, pop my staircases, and just keep flowing. Like, it's a combo deck, and I just take chances with it kind of thing. Like, of course, if you're in an amazing position, you don't ever have to throw away your hand, but if you're in a position to where, you know, you absolutely want your opponent to stop from playing Seraph, and you absolutely want to, like, ensure that this amulet pops this turn in case of staircase, like, you just make it. You just, you know, you just go for it.
Yeah, we're seeing Essia kind of go. His hand looks like it's going to develop the same game plan, except this time he has much less ramp than he was able to develop last time. Finally gets to a fervor, but had really nothing but staircases to play until then.
Yeah. And Kionis has plenty of ramp for days. And it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see if Kionis's threats in the case of like Lucifer's Israfils and things like that are going to be hindering enough to Essia's game plan that he has to stop and deal with them.
Yeah, it really makes this whole matchup kind of start to look like classic Dragon Mirrors, where even if Essia is holding on to that threat of like 14 to 16 damage from Dreadsea, how does he get the rest of the damage in here if Kionis' entire list is built to just kind of float as much as it can at about 20 defense?
That's right. That was always the classic problem with the Dragon Mirror in the first place, was if your opponent's at 20 and you're playing, 3 Israfils and a Lucifer and, all these crazy things that just keep you at 20, how do I poke enough? And that's kind of why Forte fell off the map, because Forte wasn't even good enough, because you'd attack for 7, they'd heal, 4 to 7 that same turn
Right.
while killing your Forte, and then it was just like it never happened. And I think this is a nice, interesting choice to slot back into Saha Ramp Dragon if you feel like this tempo crazy dragon is back. However, the old dragon never had Queen of the Dread Sea Genesis Dragon Ariat, so it's a completely different ballgame.
Mm-hmm. It's just so strange to me, because if before now this mirror was really, as you say, like down to just finding damage, being able to overcome your opponent's threats that are on board, it doesn't really have much burst. It can just easily, back then, it could turn into like Pokerverse, as I said before. Now
Yeah.
it's just like, what is like Kionis' main method of his winning the game here for himself? It makes me wonder, is it just like trying to find little advantages, like keeping the board from at like a pretty small margin all game?
Staying at 20 and producing a threat every single turn that has to be reacted to. That's exactly how you won the mirror match before, but I think it's even more of a thing in this matchup, because he actually does have these big threats that stay in play. Like Forte is a threat, sure, but easy to deal with. Something like Israfil, a lot harder to deal with. You kind of have to take some time and just be like, okay, do I want to Zeus into this? Do I want to, do I want to evolve Forte plus use something, or do I want to leave it in play and possibly die next turn? You know what I mean? And Kionis getting to 10 first and being able to play this before any type of Genesis Dragon, Queen of the Dread Sea, all that stuff is just so important. This is a fantastic turn.
Yeah, something very, very unfortunate I also noticed is Essia being one play point behind him could be the entire difference here, because he actually can't answer this Israfil.
Right. He cannot. And how much damage do we have? Is this already lethal? That's 12. Yeah, plus Zeus. That's already game.
So Kionis basically, without running Dread Sea, is the first to actually accomplish what a Dread Sea combo would look like.
That's right. Wait a minute. Oh, he saw the
Erd.
Sockball. I was like, okay, did he miss it? No, he's just getting fancy with this. He's got this.
Oh, right. I thought about it for a second. I was like, oh, so he's going to Erd it for another 2 off the top of my head? Wait, never mind. It's a fanfare. But yeah.
Kionis with the pump and the win, getting the win with Seraph, overcoming what we thought was the downside of the matchup and just pushing on through. My man. That
was honestly, that was a pretty incredible set of games there from Kionis, and I think he played that it really feels like, to me, it seems like he's prepared his Seraph deck incredibly well. He brought a deck that isn't really used that much in the meta right now, and played out lines of play that I think were very informed.
I think that's the key distinction right there. I feel like he understands very well his lines of play and the ordering in which he needs to do things, and when he needs to just completely abandon the Seraph plan very well, and we saw the execution of that, and that's what led him to the victory.
One of the things that I think really was successful for him was, of course, the new card, Star Torrent, was a big factor in just getting the extra little chip to allow him to do things like Blacken Scripture or trade in.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, one of the things that Seraph can do really well, but not specifically Seraph, but I guess maybe with extension to how much Amulet Countdown kind of accelerators that it has, is a tempo that you get off of some of those amulets. I distinctly remember in the game that he won with his Seraph deck, in the mid-game, how many Dragoon Scythers Essia had to commit because he needed to clear the board. I feel like that was a big turning point. You see how much health he had left. If he had one other Stormfaller, 2 other Stormfallers, it could have changed a lot. So I really appreciate the way that Kionis approached that matchup.
This is why I actually really like Dark John in the Seraph list, because you've seen the board positions. Every once in a while, you can stick a Dark John and just outright win the game because you presented a board for a single turn that your opponent couldn't deal with. Like Breath of the Salamander can't clear this board, so instead I'm just going to evolve over one thing. I play my Dark John, I evolve it, I win the game immediately. But Kionis is like, you know what? I don't even need that. I can press my advantage any way I want to. So good on him.
All right.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I feel like I feel like Kionis has actually developed a lot, and we've seen it too. Because when we've seen Kionis in the past, he's also played very interesting lists, but we've seen him run out of time thinking about things before.
Yes.
And today he was completely calm, still playing lists that took very difficult decisions to completely pilot, but he handled it just fine, piloted it to victory, so we're really seeing him just get up there.
I think you make a very good point, and it's great to see Kionis take such a good win, such a tough win here, and we have him on the line, so we're going to get to talk with Kionis just a little bit. Kionis, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
How are you doing today? That was a big win for you, bringing Seraph. How do you feel about that win?
Well, it's a good day. The sky is blue.
The sky is certainly blue. Talk to me a little bit about, we were on the desk talking about how risky it is to bring Seraph, and it definitely, I mean, maybe you can tell me a little bit more about what you think, but a tough matchup. What did you expect when you were bringing the Seraph list? Were you confident in that choice? What was your thinking?
Yes. For the Seraph list, I just bring it because it's a deck I really like to play, because it's a deck. In my opinion, there's two win conditions in this deck. There's the Seraph, and you can just tempo swing with the amulet. As you have so much way to reduce countdown.
Yes, and we definitely saw that. You opted for, I think in both games, going for that tempo win condition, and played that really well. Defeating Essie is no small feat. But Kionis, let's talk a little bit more about you as a player, kind of card games and Shadowverse. How'd you end up getting into Shadowverse and competing?
Well, where can I start? First, I really like to play card games. I play a lot of card games. And with my friends, we like to play various games. And just as a friend of mine who showed me the Shadowverse, and I just play it. It was also him who taught me about NGE, and I at first I was just
and he told you about NGE, and so you competed in it.
Yes, I just play in the qualifier. I get to qualify.
Nice, yeah.
I wasn't really expected, but I don't know.
And you're playing super well.
Here I am for the season 3, so
yeah,
I'm pretty happy about it.
Nice. I think you're growing really well as a player. Does your friend still compete? Does he help you kind of build your lists? Is he involved with kind of the things that you do in Shadowverse right now?
The fact is that right now we are both pretty bored about Shadowverse. We are just waiting, I guess, for the next expansion and all the new stuff that are coming.
Now, about that, are you looking forward to kind of rotation and the new craft that's coming out? Are those things that you're really excited about trying and playing?
I think the most thing I'm looking forward is the new class, the Portal Craft.
Yeah, Portal Craft, super exciting. I think everybody who heard about it was really kind of into it. Talk to me a little bit about kind of who helps you prepare for the tournaments, how you decide the decks that you're bringing, how you practice. Is there anybody that supports you, whether that be other players or your family or anything like that?
Actually, it's really funny that you asked me that, because I don't really prepare at all. Like, sometimes I just don't even play Shadowverse in a week. So mostly each week my strategy is that I just bring deck I like to play, and that's all.
Well, it certainly seems to be working for you very well right now. And I wish you the best of luck, Kionis. Thank you so much for taking the time and
Thank you.
talking a little bit. Good job on your performance today, and I look forward to seeing more of you kind of dominating the competition. So that was Kionis, and really interesting kind of his approach to the game seems very laid back. You know, he says, hey, you know what? I'm just going to play what I like. I'm just going to, you know, do what I think is going to fit me the most. And that's kind of something that you talked about a lot, Mofu, right? When you're talking about players need to be playing the decks that they're the most comfortable with, and kind of really just make sure that they're very familiar with all the lines of play and what's going to happen. That seems to be
something very unique about card games and about Shadowverse 2 is you have this very powerful and very wide chance to express yourself in the game. You can customize the way you play it and design it the way that you think that you can win with, and I love seeing when players do this at a tournament level.
Well, that definitely describes Kionis. Let's take a look at the standings. After his defeat, or after he defeats Essia, that puts Kionis at the top spot here, 3-1, and Essia moves down to 2-2. And that's kind of what we were going through in terms of, okay, if Kionis, Essia, and Fatina were just to lose all the rest of their games, well, that's not the case anymore, right? Because now Kionis is at 3-1. He can't be at that 2-3 scoreline. So we have to look for Fatina possibly to lose 2 if a player like Bad or Pain may want to think about coming back into that top 3 spot. So we'll have to see. The next match coming up, incidentally, is Pain versus Fatina. So, if Pain wins, that means Fatina will go to 2-2, I believe, and Pain will move up to 2-2, which sets up that scenario. So we'll see how this plays out. This could get real crazy real quick. Let's take a look at the head-to-head match here. Pain versus Fatina. Now, Pain is going to be a player that will represent Europe in the World Grand Prix, and we've seen, I think, varied outcomes here with him. Some days Pain looks incredibly strong, some days he's just had it rough, right? And definitely with the scoreline he has right now, 1-2, I believe, you know, not the greatest start. Can come back and make the 3-2 scoreline, which is still very, very good in his group. But let's talk about these lists a bit. Rune gets let through, Rune and Shadow, and then Fatina is going to be playing Shadow and Dragon. Exo, what do you see here? What are the highlights of these lineups that we're about to watch?
Yeah, well, the most interesting thing about this one is the bans. So before this match, I actually thought that Fatina would have banned out mid Shadow because he has a really good game plan against a bunch of aggro decks with his Ramp Dragon and things like that. But now that he's going to be playing against mid Shadow and Burn Rune, I feel like it's a little bit tougher for him. So I think this matchup skews back into a 50-50, and I think it's just going to come down to better play. I think Burn Rune and mid Shadow are both great decks. I think Ramp Dragon and Mid Shadow are both great decks, so we'll see who comes out on top here, but I think it's pretty even.
And you know, Fatina now on Counterpoint Virtuoso, I believe. Now he was on Crimson Fences for the longest time, and now has made the swap to CPV. He'll be joining players like Bottles and kind of leading that team ahead. Let's take a look at Burn Rune, okay? And one of the big cards, I think, in this deck that we can talk about is Magic Illusionist, the guy who always wants you to hang out. He's that friend that, grabs his phone and just texts everybody and like, hey guys, let's hang out. He's always gathering people, Talk to me a little bit about this annoying dude, Mofu.
Well, first of all, I want to say that he's one of the most attractive cards in the game, and I love him. Next, I want to say that Magic Illusionist is probably the most annoying 2-drop present in the current meta. And it took him a long while to actually get there because previously, Earthright didn't really have much direction. It didn't really have that many sigils it could develop for free. But now Carl has it attached. They have a lot better sigils now than they used to. So we see him as just a core part of this entire game plan. At best, sometimes decks like D-Shift can use some irregular removal and get rid of him with like Kaleidoscopic Glow. But otherwise, how do you actually deal with him? The answer most of the time is you don't, and you can't. You have to ignore him. And then he starts evolving face. But
talk to me about, so one of the big things about fighting Dirt Rune, Exo, is managing their Earthrights, right?
Yes.
How do you choose to pop the Illusionist over and over again to deny those Earthrights, or let the Earthrights stay and maintain the health of your board? Where do you How do you kind of rationalize either of those decisions?
Sure. So there's a few things you have to take into account. A, what can they do on their turn? How are they going to use that sigil? Can they use that sigil? If not, maybe I don't need to worry about the illusionist right now. Second thing you have to be thinking about, can I clear the illusionist and fully clear the sigils this turn? If not, maybe I don't go for that plan. You know what I mean? So it's all about calculating what you can do versus what they can do and just finding the best medium in between. But as we see with Fatina's list, and I think this is why I actually listed the ban, it's super anti-aggro. It's got the Calamitous Curses, it's got the Professor of Taboos, it's got card draw, a bunch more than we normally see with concentration and things like that. So I think that this was the premier deck to get rid of, and I think he did that correctly. But leaving Mid Shadow for Fatina, a little rough. But as far as the deck itself is concerned, I think that you really just have to make best decisions on what your opponent can do. And as long as you can, if they're not playing a Master Mage Levi, if they don't have, 6 play points to do that kind of stuff, you don't have to worry about it as much.
Mofu, in your eyes, Burn Rune. We've seen a lot of it in tournament play right now. What do you like? Do you like the aggro variation of it? Do you like the control variation of it? Do you like the deck at all? Where do you rate this?
I actually absolutely love the entire Earth portion of Rune, with the exception of a few cards that annoy me, like Hulking Giant and otherwise. But I think it's so interesting. It's a very different style of runecraft. It's not the sort of selfish combo-y, I want to win the game in one turn type. It plays it out carefully, has to consider its opponent's options very carefully. It has a lot of tools of disruption and answers. I think it's a really cool deck overall, and I'm really not surprised to see it actually just be so popular in tournaments lately now that it's gotten the tools that help push it.
Yep. And as we can see, Payne electing to go for the more offensive version of Burn Rune with his Mage of Nightfalls and Levi's and things like that. So Payne, we know he's an aggro player. We didn't expect any less. And I think Fatina knew that. That's why he kind of brought a lot of anti-aggro decks today.
Right. Now, Mage of Nightfall I find really interesting because there's like two different sort of game plans I've seen people develop with Burn Rune lately. One being one that tries to go a little bit more towards the late game. They're fine with letting games go on as long as their opponent is willing, and then they just slam like Mutagenic Bolt or something like that out of nowhere, and they're like, "Yep, I win." There's also types like the one we're seeing Payne bring, which is just damage. It is every source of damage you can possibly afford to bring.
That's right. And Mage of Nightfall is an interesting card. I mean, we've talked about this card at length over the course of a few seasons. And is it right to include? Is it bad to include? As we can see it now, it could come out later as a 4 damage card, but right now it's just a 3 play point 3/2. It's nothing specifically good because he didn't get any of his one cost amulets, and it's kind of like a make or break bonus card in the beginning. Do you have your 1-drops? Do you not? Can it be good later? It's kind of in a weird spot, I feel like, but it's not a bad card.
It may be a little bit awkward this game just because usually when I see a player bring Mage of Nightfall, I almost always see it evolve when it hits face. I've never seen it even trade, actually. It's always evolved face. But when you run it in a deck that also, as you see with Payne here, he's already having this interaction. If you also run Time Worn Mage Levi, the older version, then they are competing for your evolve points. So you see him have to throw away a really strong tool there just to develop a pretty good turn 2. But that is a lot of tools in contention in the same deck.
And going back to a previous point before the match even started, playing cards like Mage of Nightfall takes away some of the value from cards like Magic Illusionist because it will use those sigils, right? And you need a sigil for Halo Golem, and you need a sigil for the Magic Illusionist if you want to stick around. But it's just another way to deal increased damage early and kind of letting go of that late game like you were talking about.
Now, as for a matchup like this, I feel like Mage of Nightfall is a really fantastic way to open a game because before Dragon has even developed any way to defend itself, as you can see, Fatina is fighting for board, trying to have some kind of presence. He's already being shot down to what could potentially be half his original defense. And at that point, there's a very, very clear path for Burn Rune to start developing.
Ooh, that was a really nice pickup too. And now we just see just straight damage in Payne's hands. So it's about if Fatina can manage this board well enough, while also being able to keep himself healthy enough to not just outright die to burn. However, everything in Payne's hand does cost a lot, so won't be able to unload it all at one time.
Good night.
And we do see, at the very least, the hiding behind his little playpoint window there, the eking edge of an animated Sybil, able to trade in his Ayala to get overflow so that he does heal off of it. I think this is a really huge turn for Fatina.
Yep. Back to 15, solidify board control, and now we come to this point where Magic Illusionist is the big deal. But if Payne wants to start utilizing his cards, he's going to have to start sacrificing these sigils, so...
In addition to his sigil usage here, now here's a card that I've seen actually a lot of people just pack maybe 1, sometimes 2 copies of in tournament play, and this is actually the very first time after casting this deck like 18 times, exaggeration, where I've actually seen it drawn, Twin Guardians. How do you feel about this card in particular?
I think it's great as a one-of. I think in tournament play, you always need to be doing unexpected things to your opponent, because if you play into a formula, then they've played that formula, right? If they've done their testing, their research for the day, then they know what you can possibly do on your turns. If they don't consider this Twin Guardians like Wizardess of Oz play, or maybe even just a straight-up Twin Guardians next turn, maybe they aren't ready for it, you know what I mean? They weren't ready for that amount of tempo, that amount of pressure, or they weren't expecting that effect, so they threw away a card that they might have needed in that scenario. I really like it as a tech card.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think it's actually really amazing that this card suddenly just comes into competitive play, because it's been around for as long as RuneCraft has existed, I'm pretty sure. It's one of the very first tools that really defined, and even back in the days of like early classic Shadowverse, this card still didn't see very much play, just because cards like Juno's Secret Laboratory came in. But its synergy with Wizardess of Oz is so interesting. It helps add depth to this deck in a lot of matchups that are otherwise kind of awkward. It's a really cool card.
And I really like Payne's setup here. So I would 100% Master Mage Levi here.
The name's Levi. Don't forget.
And this basically says, I know you have Bahamut next turn anyway, so my Magic Illusion isn't going to get any more value. Plus I get to clear your board.
It challenges Patina to go as far as he can in one turn to really finish or come back against the board. But at one glance, we know Fatina did actually manage to assemble his pieces in time.
Yep. He got enough chip damage in the previous turn. Payne losing the aggro damage race to Dragon. And I think it all comes down to just the simple early game plans, like where Fatina gets to ramp and do all the things he wants, Sybil in the mid game. Payne has to like stop, play a sigil, stop, play a 3-drop that then gets benefit from that sigil, and just does everything a little bit slower, right? And without those big swing turns with Wizardess of Oz or any kind of control cards to like stop what your opponent's doing, you're basically just racing your opponent. And sometimes Dragon can do just what we saw, and in essence has been doing it every single time we've seen the Dragon deck, just able to Queen of the Dreadsea super early, even if it doesn't win in the case of, you know, Essia.
Yeah. And in addition to all of that, it's like, how do you really stop the Dreadsea game plan from happening? He had Twin Guardians, which does actually help, but Dreadsea's not really the only card he has to go for. He could just bide his time, deal with the bodies, then play his combo. I think he had a very comfortable game, that one.
Well, that's the double-edged sword, right? Do I play my board full of wards and play right into Bahamut, or do I not and die to the combo? It's a really nice end game that Dragon has now.
Do you feel like if Rune pulls a faster-paced hand, that they can avoid that problem entirely, or does Dragon have enough survivability to kind of even mitigate that?
If Scrap Iron Smelter was played on turn 1, Payne could have easily won that game, but it wasn't. And that simple lack of tempo is all it takes when you're talking about two decks that are just trying to kill you as fast as they can.
Right. As a Dreadsea is a deck, and it's worth mentioning sometimes in terms of like how do you play around it. It does its damage in just a very small number of huge bursts of damage, meaning wards are an actual very effective countermeasure to it. Even small ones like Scrap Iron Smelter.
Yeah, even preventing the 1 or 2 extra chip damage in the mid game, or having a ward to pop like half of the combo while also not overcommitting to Bahamut, just gives you all that breathing room that you need.
Now, really interesting here is as we were talking about Magic Illusionist earlier, and about Payne's like attempts to develop the early game, Fatina fully respected that Magic Illusionist, went for the play, even though it was quite a commitment, to not only just fully remove it, but also deny Payne the sigils.
That's right. And I think it plays right into that point. Can I fully remove it, or can I just pop the sigils? And he could fully remove it, so he went all in for it.
Now this is a matchup that I've recently gained a lot of familiarity with, just because I think in NA especially, these two are very, very popular decks. Burn Rune and Mid Shadow, two really consistent game plans. Though, if I were to call it at the exact moment, I think Pain's not actually in that great of a spot, because he has developed a bit of board. But where you really want to be with this deck is you want to have things you know you're going up in towards, especially having like a Master Mage Levi in hand. And right now, he doesn't have resources that do a lot for him immediately.
I would say in my mind, and I've talked about this matchup quite a bit, I think it's still in favor of Burn Rune, but they have to have the specific cards like you're talking about. Without knowing that he has a Wizardess of Oz on top or a Master Mage Levi, his decisions are going to be very important here. I feel like he's just got to push for it and hope he draws into it at this point. I think that's what he's feeling.
I suppose with Wizardess of Oz being such an important piece of the deck, it's always run at 3. Hoping that you find it pretty soon isn't really that unlikely of a strategy or something to put your money on. Because, I mean, even in this situation, it's not so bad. He has a board that's very hard to get rid of. Fatina's still playing very reactively towards it. It gives him time to find things like Oz.
And in doing so, emptying out his entire hand, which would seem bad at a glance, but if you draw into your Wizardess, it's the best thing that you can actually be doing. Now, I don't know if I like not getting the Evo point off on the last Levi and pushing for the extra 2, because essentially he lost the damage by doing that. I don't like it. If it comes down to like 1 damage, we'll see. I mean, usually it doesn't in this type of a matchup, but if it does, I mean, it's just small things like that that I feel like you could just correct.
I guess if anything, aiming a Soul Squasher at an Illusionist is less net loss of stats, I think, than aiming it at Levi. But still, not having the Crimson Sorcery when you're still down on resources like this is not ideal for Pain here.
Right. Especially when you have to start contesting with things like Ceres.
And Fatina, just knowing what options he has, goes for developing 2 bodies that each now stick at 4 defense, and Magic Illusionist itself can't even trade into one of them. He's very defended against Master Mage Levi.
That's right. Master Mage, like the last Evo point will have to be used if Ceres wants to be taken off the table, and this is kind of like the only card that swung the matchup in my mind. Like, yes, Blade Fiend is really good, but Ceres really, just because of the extra innate healing that you get in Shadow that it never had before, I feel like really kind of, if you draw Ceres, you're in an amazing position. If you don't draw Ceres, it's just like it always has been, and Dirt Rune just kind of runs over you. But Ceres, man, my God, I know we talk a lot about this card all the time, but it's so good.
You cannot understate how much Ceres has transformed Shadow, I think. I mean, it reads like a legendary to me. It's like a card that just completely drops everything the class was doing before. This is now possible. The way I kind of compare it to other cards in my head is it's kind of like a Scarlet Sabrewer for this class. It is adept at removing annoying threats. It is, I mean, even unlike Sabrewer, little things can't trade into her, and you get that healing from her. It's such a huge impact on the game that you just can't ignore it. And a lot of classes just fall over against it.
Yeah, like look at the amount of resources. Like, played the Master Mage Levi, might not necessarily wanted to play that this turn, probably did, but then has to use the Evo point in order to kill a 1/1. A 1/1. You know, that never feels good.
Right. That gives Fatina the shadows he needs to just simply develop an Ixter, and now Pain's just completely out of resources.
Yep. And this is where we see the God Wizards of Oz draws, or we don't, and we see Pain kind of start fading here.
Another Master Mage doesn't really put him in that great of a spot. Comparable, if anything, to a Hector that doesn't need the hand setup here.
Right. And Fatina can just start playing towards the long game. I mean, if the Master Mage Levi comes down, then just trade easy with the Akhtar, play a Thane, and then once that Thane hits the board, yikes. We've seen Thane in endgame situations. It gets pretty rough after that.
This is absolutely the sweet spot, I'd like to say, for Shadow. I think it's interesting because mid-range is it's an archetype where its existence in Shadowverse tends to always be a little bit here or there. Like Sword, its mid-range deck is still struggling to really find its place, but Shadow has such an immense ability to end games around this spot. Once it hits that magic number of 7, that every single turn between Ixer and Thane, that's just most classes just can't deal with the end, like this unending onslaught of both value and pressure it can put on.
Right. Especially when you start getting into the combos with Soul Conversion on Thane and dealing extra damage and playing multiple Thanes. I mean, it gets to this really weird end game. And it looks like Payne's just going to fold to this one. He sees the writing on the wall.
Time and time again, Fatina shows that he is an absolute terror. A beast. I think Burn Rune displayed a not super fantastic performance today.
Well, I think it's realistically the inclusion of Mage of Nightfall. Had Mage of Nightfall been Carl in most of those situations, I think he would have been fine.
What do you think is, so Mage of Nightfall, where would you include it? Where would you not include it?
I would just include it, period. But Mofu, maybe you can shed some more light on it.
At a second glance, I think he did have 3 Carls in his list anyway. He just never saw one all those games, got the mages instead. If I would set up that series of games to anything, it's the fact that he never saw a single Wizardess of Oz. I think that has to be it.
Yeah, that definitely, yeah. I mean, like we said, that's the end game result that you want. If you never draw it, it's kind of rough. It's like not drawing Seraph, a little different because it's a different type of end game, but just not having your end game options in an end game situation feels bad.
Fatina takes the win, and we can take a look at how that leaves him in the groups. So does very well for himself. 3-1 on the top end. Kionis and Fatina have a great scoreline, and this is going to separate all these players here, right? SCM Best Marma have the opportunity, possibly, to go up 3-2 and have a 4-way tie up there. But we are currently segmented into Kionis and Fatina at the top, SCM Marma in the middle, and Pain and Bad on the bottom. And we're really going to have to look between SCM Marma to how they differentiate their score lines, right? Is there one player that's going to go 2-3? Is there one player that's going to go 3-2? That's a key point, because depending on what happens, one of them makes it into the finals, and one of them gets left behind. So, Group A done for the week, and I think it was a pretty good group of play. There's one more week left for them, but I have a feeling that it's not super likely for that group to move too much more. I think Fatina and Essia have kind of solidified themselves as very strong in that position.
Absolutely. I think the bottom of the bracket, I mean, has a lot going on too, though. So we'll see. Maybe that third spot does, go into this crazy tie, and I think it's more than possible to do so.
Absolutely. Well, if you guys want to take a look at the standings, the live update of the standings, you can go to the website shadowverse.nge.io and make sure you check out the player profiles that are live now. Go ahead and click on one of the players' names and you can see information about that player and how he's done in the season, all that great stuff. There's also some fantastic articles written by Aya Senpai on the website about anything tournament related, the meta game, how to build your decks, all these kind of cool things. Go give it a read. Check it out. Some very interesting information there. So, that wraps up Group A. We still have Group B to watch today, but before we do that, we're going to have a little bit of a break, some coffee, some cookies, go to the toilet.
I wish.
I
wish I had cookies, to be honest.
I
No
have
coffee,
cookies. Thanksgiving leftovers. Come on, Mofu.
I have like mashed potatoes and that's it.
All right. We're going to go eat some turkey and mashed potatoes, and when we're back, Group B of the round robin. right, we're back. We had a little bit of a break, and now we're ready and set to go again. And, you know, there's a few things that are happening here in the next few weeks for the Shadowverse Open. We're wrapping up the Invitational stages, and we're heading quickly into the regional finals. And that means that the grand final, the grand champion winner of the Starforged Legends season of the Shadowverse Open is about to be decided. I feel like we've been playing, you know, Starforged Legends for a long time now. It really feels like it's been a good amount of time that we've been playing in this set. But let's just take a look at some of the dates here and figure out exactly when that's going to be happening. The regional finals, week 10 and 11. So that's December 9th and December 17th. Not too far away. Not too far away. And the top players from North America and Europe will be fighting out in double elimination format, back to the brackets again. Best of 3 and the 3-deck 1-band format there. $6,500 for it, and it's going to be incredibly exciting because it's right around that time where after the regional finals is finished, these players are going out to the World Grand Prix. That's 2 big events of Shadowverse competition wrapping up, and I can't wait to see what's going to happen then.
I'm going to keep saying every single cast, Rady, tell them how much they're going to be playing for at the World Grand Prix.
120,000. 120,000.
I don't even know how to count that high. It's too much money, is what it is.
Sounds even crazier when you say it in yen.
And yeah, what is it?
Yeah, just multiply by 100.
Multiply by 100.
Multiply by 100. I'm too lazy.
1,200,000.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, my math is bad.
I like it better that way. Yeah, 1,200,000, not US dollars.
not US dollars, but a lot of money still. And I can't wait to see the competition on that day. But we have some Group B matches to go through. And that's going to be starting off with Mad Allen versus Meow, Suzuki versus Onion Sheep, and Akamaru Red versus Das V. And this group is quite varied. I feel like there's a lot of character in this group. You've got Akamaru, and then you've got Suzuki, who kind of head up the HSK endeavors, right? And then you have Meow, who's a new player who's actually been pretty willing to bring decks that I wouldn't say are super out in the left field, but aren't standard, right?
Right.
And there's a lot of things that happen in this group that I think are very interesting to take note of. But our first match here, Mad Allen versus Meow, let's talk about it a little bit. Let's take a look at these decks that people are bringing here. Rune and Haven, and then Haven and Blood. So definitely Haven making a strong showing today. No, I don't think they're running Seraph. I think only Kionis is running Seraph. But talk to me a little bit about these lists and if there are any kind of shortcomings or gaps here, or what you think they were set up to try to accomplish with these picks here, Exo.
Well, Meow's really starting to set himself, in my mind, apart from the other new players in the fact that he is kind of evolving into a Fatina-like character to me. Very good at understanding his lineups, very good at understanding what his opponents are going to bring in the given week that he's playing against them. And like you said, willing to kind of go off the radar and play outside decks to be able to accomplish this goal. Matt Allen brought 2 aggro decks. He's playing Tempo Haven, and the other deck he's bringing is Burn Room. And then he's playing against Meow's lineup of Alana Aegis Haven, Saha Ramp Dragon, Control Blood, just all these super aggro counters. It's really hard to pick one out to ban. It looks like Saha was the ban, but it's still going to be a hard road to climb for Matt Allen.
Let's talk a little bit about Sword. Now, I know Mofu likes himself some Swordcraft. Matt Allen brought a Swordcraft deck that I think is a slightly slower pace than what we've traditionally seen Sword bring, at least as of late. And the feature card that I want to talk about is something that we sometimes see, but not super commonly. Old Man and Old Woman. This is a very unique card, I feel like. What are your thoughts, Mofu?
Now, I think that first of all, the cutest thing about this card is that I think the can attack 2 times per turn thing is like an implication that there's like 2 actual characters in the card. It's like both of them working together. And then when you evolve them, it's like your homegirl, like the old lady there, her hand alone that she's holding up has Bane. Like, what more can you ask for in a card, honestly? It's really interesting, I think, where it fits competitively. is that this card is one of Sword's only ways in the class actually where it can actually cause tempo swings on turn 4 with the evolve if it's on the draw. If you really think about it, Sword has never had something like that, not with Floral Fencer or otherwise. And if you go first, you don't lose that much value off of it because this thing is a brutal curve into White General. It gets that bonus attack from it and still has that twice attacks per turn. It's a really, really interesting and versatile card. I'm really excited to see how it works.
And the list is definitely paced with a short curve, right? And I feel like that's traditionally what Swordcraft does. But Old Man, Old Woman, would you classify this under a very aggressive card, or would you think that it's more removal based with how it is interacting with Evolution turns Exile?
Well, that's exactly like Mofu said. I mean, you've got 2 cards in one, right? It can play both roles very well. It can play defensively, it can play offensively, and I like to see it finally being included with White General. We talked about it last time we saw it included in a Sword list. White General wasn't there to kind of back it up, but now it is, and I really like it over playing that frickin' frog, that frickin' Peppo that Sword players can't seem to get rid of. I think White General's an awesome choice, and I think adding in Old Man, Old Woman on top of that just propels how good White General can be.
When we look at Matt Allen's Sword list and we try to kind of push it up against Havencraft, which do you think you give an edge to? Is Swordcraft kind of feeling good with how it kind of curves out super aggressively, or is Havencraft just has enough tempo, has enough things that just slow down Swordcraft just enough to make it very hard to make the choice to go face?
I think Sword is the deck to beat Haven out of the aggro decks that he has brought, because life gain is really good against burn. You can kind of pace burn with your healing. A lot of times it's hard in the early game to pace your heal with what Sword can actually present on the table. So I think Sword might have a good win here. I think Burn Rune is a little rough against both of the matchups that we're going to see it fight against here.
All right. Well, Mofu, for this particular matchup here, we see 2 Haven decks coming in. In your mind, what do you think is the advantage to kind of setting up Havencraft in this format, especially against these opponents here? Where do you think these players are looking to gain their advantage?
As for Haven, even though we're not going to apparently see either of it so far, one thing that's noteworthy about how these 2 players have built it differently is on the side of Matt Allen, we have, as Exo mentioned, tempo. On the side of Meow, we have something that's a lot more of an Elena Aegis sort of thing. I think Haven's a class that, if it has the time to develop, then it has all the tools it really needs to win a game in a very fair manner. It has tempo on its evolves with tea time, cudgel, things like that. It has generation of delayed damage, though it is instant with Storm with the birds and otherwise. It's consistent. It has a lot of ways to maintain its resources. I think it's a solid class, but sometimes it just doesn't really quite get there the way other classes can, just because some of its options can be so delayed and slow.
Right, it's more just based on the fact that Haven's followers are just kind of clunky. They don't deal as much damage as you want them to. They don't always evolve for full stats. I mean, there's a whole lot of things hindering their aggressive action part of things outside of the amulet tempo that we're going to see from Matt Allen. But, of course, we've seen amulets even have their own problems in the early game against other decks because they don't actually develop followers in the early game. It's hard to press against your opponent. But playing against this full control lineup, I think Amulet Haven is going to find a nice spot.
Now, I'm really interested to see how they work later on, but for now, looks like we have 2 decks that are a bit more familiar to the competitive scene, that being Control Blood on the side of Meow, and Burn Rune, not a list too unlike what we were seeing before, except I think this one shirks the Twin Guardians and some other techs in order to just run 2 copies of Mutagenic Bolt.
Which I can't hate on, especially if you're going to go into a matchup where you feel like control is what they're bringing. Mutagenic Bolt can be that nail in the coffin to where you just play it, and you just don't have to do anything for a few turns and let those rats tick down, and then you can finally just push with whatever burn you have left.
And it looks like Matt Allen is in a pretty perfectly good spot at the very start here. He's already developed a board. I meant to mention his Carl draw there was very fortunate in that his Magic Illusionist is just so sticky now. So he puts Meow in a pretty tough spot in the early game.
And this is kind of a funny spot that Matt Allen puts himself into with the Mage of Nightfall. Does he get rid of the value that Magic Illusionist could bring him against this matchup? This is one of the best matchups for Magic Illusionist. Looks like he's just going to get rid of it.
It is a huge setup of damage, Really unfortunate here. Wait, actually, never mind. I saw him dealing the damage to the mask, and I was like, oh no, it has one more tick, so Belphegor is now going to be able to draw me out some cards with no payment on life. That's wrong. I forgot that that's how Countdown Amulets work. So it actually delays him one thing.
But Magic Illusionist is going to get taken care of. The Blood Moon draw was a perfect draw. I thought that Belphegor might have been one of the better options just to set him up for like a Righteous Devil Diabolic Drain turn the next turn. But with Blood Moon now, I think that Meow has definitely taken over control of this game with the options that he has in his hand.
Right. I was about to mention in this situation what was the right evolve to make, whether Carl or Mage of Nightfall, because Mage of Nightfall had a bit of a stat advantage over Carl there. So if he evolves it, he puts all of his eggs into one basket. It does play around another Diabolic Drain, but Meow has a really strong option with that Righteous Devil.
Yeah, Righteous Devil plus Diabolic Drain is going to heal him all the way back up to 18 this turn, after taking that huge swing and basically negating the Evo point that Matt Allen used. So, like, this is one of the strongest things that you can do in any control deck, if not the strongest thing you can do on turn 5, Righteous Devil and the Diabolic Drain. And we've seen our control blood players get this more often than not, which is kind of scary.
I mean, Meow, without the healing that we've seen him play over the past 3 turns, would be at 10 remaining defense here. So,
yeah,
the amount of recovery in Control Blood and how much it can just shrug off the damage of a dedicated burn deck is probably still its strongest quality, if you ask me.
Yep. And cards like Belphegor are just absolutely insane with Blood Moon on the table, because you don't have to take the extra damage immediately, and you get to draw into cards like Diabolic Drain. Like, this just starts looking more gross and more gross as time goes on.
To be honest, if you ask me, I think if you're Meow here, you're playing Control Blood, you're against Burn Rune, and you've drawn 3 Diabolic Drains in your top 13 cards, I actually don't see how you lose the game.
Yeah, it's really hard to, especially with a Righteous Devil. You still have 2 of your evolves left. You have board clears. You're drawing, like, his draws have been very good. I mean, having Belphegor to draw into the Diabolic Drain, drawing into another Belphegor here to just kind of press more card advantage and just, like, be prepared for any situation. I feel like Meow is in complete control of this game.
I'll take a quick gander at his deck list to confirm that his win conditions are a little bit strange this time. He has 1 single copy of Karabos, which could serve as a win condition if he finds it. Otherwise, double Temptress Vampire, some Bahamut's, and 1 copy of Prince of Darkness. This deck actually doesn't run Spawn of the Abyss, and I need you to help me figure that one out.
I think it's just, what do you plan on playing against? He brought an all-control lineup to beat aggro, and I think the Prince of Darkness is just an absolute hedge in case Matt Allen pulled an audible on him. Generally speaking, Spawn of the Abyss is a faster win condition, but Prince of Darkness can be kind of an inevitable win condition if you're playing like really heavy control versus really heavy control. And to be fair, he's not the only one playing Prince of Darkness today, and you guys will see that next round once we pull up the decks here, but we haven't seen it in competitive play in forever, and just, I don't know, when one player drinks the Kool-Aid on a region, somebody else does, and then sometimes it's a domino effect.
Right. And you talking about that made me realize also, in terms of matchup, I didn't think about this before, but Prince of Darkness, what does Mutagenic Bolt do against that? Probably absolutely nothing. It answers the 13/13, but if you're really just pulling in through a Satan, you've probably already gotten pretty far. As for Spawn of the Abyss, that's actually quite a perfect answer, so Meow maybe teched the win conditions of this list specifically to be able to deal with a list like Matt Allen's Burn Rune.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Being able to deal with Spawn of the Abyss in such a way like Mutagenic Bolt, and that's kind of always been its crux, even when it was at its best before it got nerfed. It was always just about, how can I kill this? Mutagenic Bolt's always been a perfect answer, and just like you said, Prince of Darkness gets right around Mutagenic Bolt, not fully, but you're going to be drawing into cards that, do a lot more than just a 1/1 flame right after your Spawn of the Abyss gets taken care of.
But aside from the win conditions that Meow is packing for this game, I feel like we're looking at a similar situation that we saw Pain put in before, where eventually, if the damage that you're putting on is not sticking as Burn Rune, then eventually you just run out of ways to win the game. He doesn't really have the tools to develop a board that Control Blood of all lists wouldn't be able to deal with. He's not going to have the Burst from Hand ever to really snipe Meow down.
Right. And this game is another perfect example of, if you guys didn't really get the point of what I meant by it doesn't matter what you have left over in your hand when you're a control deck to win with. Like, you don't actually need to play win conditions against every style of deck, because look at the card economy, right? Matt Allen's down to 3 cards, not really anything super productive to do with those cards. Meow has a full hand. He could literally just play 3 Baphomets, you know what I mean, and then follow that up with like 3 Unicas after like dealing with the board, and just like continue to just deal extra damage over time, while having so many more cards than Matt Allen has access to.
And it's interesting to me because I feel like Control Blood is one of the only decks that's still tournament relevant that has ways of playing like that. I mean, other classes, maybe I'd say Dragon, like probably especially back in Prime Dragon Keeper's day, were able to win off of the little advantage of having card advantage just like that. But we don't really see that happening anymore. I think as this game continues to grow, we're seeing more archetypes which kind of shirk the importance of card advantage in favor of like really strong synergies, but we just don't really see that happen with Control Blood.
Right. Yeah, Control Blood is I think the only deck that can really play that way in the most successful front because of things like Righteous Devil and Diabolic Drain. I think Diabolic Drain single-handedly might be one of the best control cards, if not the best control card in the game, with Righteous Devil being in the top 3 probably, or the top 5 at the very least. But when you pair them together, I mean, your early game / mid game just gets taken care of. You can literally wipe away 3, 4, 5 turns worth of damage from an aggro deck with just that 2-card combo.
Yeah, and to dissect Diabolic Drain in like a matchup like this, I think if you want to beat Control Blood, you have to have a lot of shares and a lot of investments in the card economy, the way you said it before. And Diabolic Drain is really hard to beat in value. The Crimson Sorcery in Matt Allen's hand, if you think about it, it's a lot of damage, it's a really efficient card. But if you think about it in terms of Meow has already played 3 Diabolic Drains and gained 6 health, then somewhere down the line that health advantage kind of like effectively discards this Crimson Sorcery. It's not as effective anymore because your opponent's no longer ever in the position where it's going to finish them off. So able to win through value alone, just 2 Ephemeras, knows Matt Allen is out of resources or running out of them. He'll never be able to deal with it. As you said, sometimes a control deck just needs to have bodies at all to win.
Yep. And like, I mean, Emeralda is no slouch, right? She's a great finisher, she's a great follower, but she's only a 4-attack follower, right? It's not an Israfil, it's not a Bahamut, it's not some craziness. Like Temptress Vampire deals 5, great. It's kind of like a Forte on the front end, and it leaves a 5/5 bottom behind. But again, it's just a 5/5. Like, these aren't these crazy monsters that we see out of Dragon. They're just efficient. They're good. They do their jobs well. And then they end up just finishing out the game because you have those cards left over, whereas Matt Allen, as you can see, has nothing left over.
And this Temptress Vampire now discards the rest of the resources which Matt Allen had been pouring in before.
Right. Ooh, okay. Here we get to see if Wizardess can start pulling back.
It's gonna need to be something pretty big here. Needs an answer to it. Only pulls 1 spell off of it.
Ugh. Yes, and not enough play points to effectively do Halo Golem and Piercing Rune to take out that Temptress Vampire. So we'll probably have to trade the Levi into it.
Right.
Or might just say, you know what, I don't care. You know what, if you have it, you have it. I have to deal damage. I think that's actually the correct line of thought. If I'm Matt Allen, I've got to be thinking, okay, he's healed infinite against me. He's cheated the entire game. I need to just push as much damage as I possibly can and just forget about anything that he can do.
Still trading though, it seems.
Yeah, still trading though, and I think that's a fine line to not die, but I don't think it's a fine line to actually win the game.
Yeah, we've seen Matt Allen kind of been, even since the start of the game, he's been cornered into a spot where even an attempt to come back with Wizardess of Oz is not nearly going to give him the value he needed originally to get that foot on top of Control Blood. Right. I think we really saw it with Meow just finding his Diabolic Drains top 13. Already had a mask which absorbed a lot of damage in its own right, and has had Blood Moons up this entire game. I don't think he's even been in Vengeance range once.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Blood Moon just showing off its efficiency as well. Obviously, you discard a card essentially while playing it, but it just activates every other card that you have in your deck, namely Belphegor, to draw those extra cards back that you lose from the Blood Moon. So not really feeling the negative effects of it.
Right. Well,
ooh, here we go.
Meow's located a win condition. I'd like to see that.
Yes.
When I when I first started playing this game, I always thought this was just the sickest animation I've ever seen. I mean, you actually see the cards that he's got, like, the Prince of Darkness's deck itself is, like, flying up towards you.
He's very menacing looking, too. I mean, as he should be. He's the Prince of Darkness. But I think it's beautiful card art. Animated, it's obviously insane. But yeah, now we're in a situation that even if Matt Allen had something crazy he could do, he's got to face the Apocalypse deck now.
Yeah, and as I mentioned before, pretty nice. I think there were 6 cards that just simply won the game outright. The Silent Riders, Diabolic, I call them Diabolic Drains, but Disexaminations, I believe. Right, but he had a Mutagenic Bolt, and that would have solved the problem temporarily from like a spawn, but what does it do to Prince of Darkness, really? Absolutely nothing.
Right. Nothing. You deal with the 6/6. I think Prince of Darkness says on the card you can deal with this when I play it, but you're not going to be able to deal with anything else that I do for the rest of the game. I kind of miss the Prince meta game. I remember when Prince was like the de facto finisher for Ramp Dragon and Haven, you know, Guardian Sun Haven, things like that. I miss those days because winning through Prince of Darkness always felt like an insanely cool victory. You're just like, oh, right. You played Prince, I still won. Get at me.
I mean, even for like deck building value, you put in 1 Prince of Darkness and you've added 11 legendaries to your deck. But I miss it a lot too, just because back in the day, like Prince of Darkness was a win condition that was very guaranteed. It's like you can't really survive his entire deck or the entire Apocalypse deck. But at the very least, back when control mirrors tended to still come down to playing win conditions first or as soon as possible, getting them before your opponent, there was a lot more depth behind what am I going to get out of my Prince of Darkness first versus older control mirrors like Shadow just trying to get Mordecai on board first.
Usually it was always a prayer of don't let Estroth's Reckoning be one of the first couple cards that they get. Please, 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 because then it makes the rest of the game so much harder.
Right, and ideally never draw the 13/13, which is strange to say. It's so huge and such a threat, but like it's the least tempo-oriented card among it. But now we finally do get to see one of the Haven lists in action. This one's Meows. I believe this is the Elena one.
Yes, this is Elena with Aether of the White Wing, with Aegis, with Taurus, and with Tenko as the pull instead of Cleric Lancer in this deck, which I really like. So I thought this deck looked really cool, and I actually played this on the ladder until the cast started today. It's really solid. I think it's awesome. I think it's a great deck.
At a glance, it looks very consistent to me. I think we've talked about this a lot before already, but I'm a huge fan of Aether of the White Wing. I think this just may be my favorite Haven legendary.
Yeah, I mean, it just allows Haven to do anything, right? We've seen Cleric Lancer be used with Aether of the White Wing to kind of just shore up the mid game and play a more defensive route. We see it with Tankos to be aggressive. We've seen it with Ancient Lion Spirits. We've seen it with a whole bevy of different things. And then the end game also, right? Like, are you playing Taurus? Are you playing multiple Taurus? Are you playing Aegis? Are you playing, you know, what are your end game followers that you're going to be playing alongside of it to make it worthwhile? And yeah, your options are endless.
We've never like really seen a way of thinking about Haven like this, and that's something that I kind of actually really love about Shadowverse a lot. Is sometimes it just takes the addition of a single card with a very interesting effect to completely add a new perspective to a class. Like before Aether, we would never have imagined that there would be such thing as toolboxing the followers of Haven. It's like before then we only really saw things that interacted with amulets and countdowns. But now we see lists like this become possible where Elena can be built in this completely new fashion.
So would you say that Haven can now be dissected for time purposes as before Aether of the White Wing and after Aether of the White Wing?
That's a really interesting question, actually. I'd say if I were to dissect Haven, it would really just kind of like come down to its win conditions in the past have been kind of linear. The ones that didn't really offer ways to win, like Skullfin, if that could be called a win condition, or Eidolon, were things that, while you could say that they're not linear because there's a lot of different things or different directions you can take them with other amulets, the best amulet that really ever worked with speeding up amulet countdowns was Seraph, which itself I think can come down to being pretty linear. Whereas when you suddenly have this thing like Aether, even just a single deck can do so many different things with it, as we see with Meows. you can pull out a Storm finisher like Taurus. You can pull out an alternate, well, sort of alternate win condition in a single copy of Aegis, or just use it to augment your Elena style. It's like, the way it manages to combine so many different previous strategies of Haven in just a single interesting effect is what just enchants me about this card.
There's only one thing I don't like about the card, and that's all I'll say about the bad sides of her. You can't really play Dark John with her. You can,
Right.
but you don't want to. And I kind of want to because she adds so much defense to the board when you play her. It makes Dark John just that much better, but it kind of messes up the entire game plan of everything you want to do before you jam it to play Taurus in the late game, which doesn't feel good.
Well, I guess at the very least, if you wait long enough, then you can kind of play them together in a way that makes sense. Because you can just, like, if she pulls out the latest possible follower, then maybe additional copies of late game followers like Taurus and Aegis and Meow's deck makes even things like that possible. It's like, what a cool card, really.
Absolutely. And now we kind of see what Elena does versus aggro decks. It kind of keeps pace because its followers are not small, and it has a lot of options to heal. And then if Mad Owl never goes wide, their Themis is decreased to kind of shore up that. And I think next turn, I think this is just Aether of the White Wing into Tenko, and we're just going to see some life gain start happening.
It definitely seems like the strongest play. I would agree as well. I mean, I think there's something that's kind of surprising me about today that I haven't really seen before today. I thought Burn Rune looked really, really, really strong. Like, I thought it was probably one of the most consistent decks I'd seen in a really long while. But every time I've seen it play today, it just doesn't really seem to be working really well in, like, grinding its opponents out the way I've seen it happen before.
I think a lot of people are just more prepared for it now. They saw how effective it's been, and Meow actually missing a life gain there by attacking before playing the Aether of the White Wing, which might matter. One health against a burn deck might matter, but I think a lot of people are just prepared for it now. They know how Burn Rune works, they know how to get around it, and I think we're really seeing that today.
And now you can just kind of see, like, even with having drawn, like, really powerful tools like Master Mage Levi and the like, Mad Allen's still not really in a good position at all. He's still facing down a Tenko. That's another heal. Elena finally has been put down. Has no real direction.
No real direction, and like Tenko has to be answered. You can't let Tenko sit and play because it will just grow the board astronomically. And because of the Alanas now, every threat that Meow plays is just going to be massive.
Even Tenko itself. Yeah, I actually found that to be a really interesting play too.
Yeah, I was thinking about playing Unica and just developing more threats just to make faster. Now, the one thing that Mad Allen can still do to win is if Meow doesn't, if he gives Mad Allen enough time, he can still draw Wizardess and still do something like a big mutagenic bolt or something like that against Meow to like kind of push him into the end game here. So Meow taking these extra turns might cost him, but we'll see. He's got a lot of options.
Definitely not out yet. I mean, he does have 2 more win conditions, as we mentioned. An Aegis he could just simply plonk down soon. Looks like he's going to set it up, still put the Unica down.
And this is like one of the worst feel-bad moments ever against Alana. It's like, that Unica doesn't have to do anything special, except for at the beginning of your turn heal. And it just makes Alana's gross, along with Henko now too. Yeah, I think this game now, after Mad Allen's draw of Scrap Iron Smelter, this is lights out.
Now that Meow has the opportunity to just kind of slam his Heavenly Aegis, then Mad Allen it's too late now to draw Wizardess of Oz into any kind of comeback, because here he loses his ward, and it's just only a matter of time, really.
Yep, especially because Unica has to be dealt with. Even if Unica's dealt with, we already see a Tenko in hand. We already see an Aether of the White Wing that can pull a Taurus in hand. Just everything's looking good for Meow here.
So, really, I find this deck to be so interesting. I haven't really played that much Haven myself. I'm not exactly like a huge opinion of it, or one whose opinion can really be trusted. But I feel like decks like this are really interesting and good for the game. I think they have a lot of very interesting mechanics going on between them, and they offer people answers to a lot of weird matchups that Haven struggled with before. And this finally is the Oz, but it might not be enough.
And I think Matt Allen's going to realize that, and he's going to quickly scoop. And Meow's going to take this one very convincingly. The real topic of consideration now, Mofu, is should people be bringing Burn Rune after what we've been seeing today?
Well, I'm trying to recall if we've really seen it actually like kind of kick off at any point today. Because it's a deck that really easily gets to its game plan. But really today it just didn't seem that great, and I wonder, is it because people were prepared for it? Or is it just variance? I find it hard to call that.
Rainy, talk to us. What do you think about Burn Rune? It's been one of the most effective decks up until this point. How do you feel about it now?
I think people have been, preparing and gearing their decks towards fighting against Burn Rune. 9/11 is a quick response. When something's on fire, they just plop down some healing, and you can actually run out of reach in certain instances. And we were talking about before the broadcast kicked off just how strong some of these healing decks were. Whether that be on the end of Dragoncraft, especially when Sybil first came out alongside Ouroboros, we really got a first-hand look at healing and its effect. Control Blood has been around for a long time, and we've seen all of that displayed today, right? Healing from Sybil, healing from things like Righteous Devil, healing from things like in Ilana Haven, right? And I really think that the fact that these decks are becoming more and more prominent starts to make things like Burn Rune less appealing to me, at least.
People aren't playing straightforward curves and just trying to end the game very fast anymore. Some decks are trying to, cheat. I gotta say, Meow, you did really well that match, but you cheated. Okay, every single one of your decks included heal, and that's not what we like to see. That's what we like to see, but that's not what we like to see. You know what I mean?
It's unsportsmanlike to heal. Come on.
That's right.
Well, I don't know about that much, but let's take a look at the standings here. Meow able to take that match over Matt Allen, moving Meow up to 3-1, doing pretty well for himself in Group B. So far, only rivaled by Akamaru Red's scoreline of 3-0, possibly 4-0 today, or maybe Meow is going to tie it up 3-1, depending on how Akamaru Red performs. Matt Allen, meanwhile, will go down to the bottom end of the bracket, just above Dasvi, at 1-3. So, I think that you guys have laid the exact question on the table here. These decks, aggro-oriented, are kind of being phased out by people bringing decks that have that healing, have that opportunity, and as we see, the cycle of life in Shadowverse, that means combo is it, right? If the aggro game plan is not enough, and playing out cards and early curves is not good enough, then what you need is something that can punch through and do incredible amounts of damage, enough that it doesn't matter if you heal or not, right? And I think that's going to be key. We've seen combo do very well in Group A, but let's see if Group B is the same here. Our next match is going to be Sizoni versus Onion Chibi. This is going to be an interesting one. This is, I think, Sizoni. We were talking about it before the broadcast, but
oh yeah,
the boys dropped his limiters. He just says, you know what? I'm gonna play what I like to play, and that might be very scary in something like Sizoni's hands, right? Meanwhile, Onion Sheep, I think, has traditionally, I think, maybe followed in the footsteps of a player like Akamaru Red, or at least is aligned in that kind of category, where I would say, let's pick the decks that are the most consistent and learn the lines of play and learn the intricacies of playing against a variety of matchups with those decks.
Absolutely.
Polar opposites to me. Polar opposites. Yep. And Sizoni, if there's anything, I think he's like the competitive version of Aya Senpai, right? Where he's
absolutely, yeah.
He's like,
that's exactly the best way to put it.
I know all these weird things, and I'm just gonna use them to beat people up. And Sizoni does that in competition. So,
well, Mofu has, I think, some pretty good insight as to why Sizoni's bringing the decks that he's bringing today. So,
tell us about it, Mofu.
So I can build a bit up on it. I haven't really talked to him myself about it, but according to some things he said, these are decks that aren't really just things that are supposed to be weird or strange or out of the ordinary, but these are actually decks that have a lot of sentimental value to him, it seems. So the reason behind him playing an aggro shadow list we'll see is really, really odd looking, Caterpillar of Riddles, Ephemera, things like that, is actually because when he first got into the game, apparently, the first deck he really learned was aggro shadow back in the Rise of Bahamut sort of meta. In addition, his favorite deck, and the one he says he's the most passionate about, is Wolf Bolt. So he's brought a Wolf Bolt list that doesn't have roaches in it. And finally, what we'll probably actually get to see the most and be the most confused by, his Dragon list with a lot of really, really oddball cards, is actually a list that is a compilation of cards that his friends all like either proclaim their favorites or cards that they wanted to add to it. It's like this really heartwarming, like friendship spirit bomb sort of list. So
yeah,
it's really going to be different from what we're used to seeing, but you know, I'm looking forward to it.
So that being said, the Dragoncraft list. I saw a particular card that a lot of people talk about. Phoenix Roost. That's been a card.
We finally get to talk about Phoenix Roost.
Talk to
That's
me
right.
about Phoenix Roost, please. What am I looking at
Did you know that this is my favorite card in Shadowverse?
today?
You might think it was a pretty play or something, but this is actually it. The card speaks for itself. There is no other card in the game with this level of just communication to your opponent. You take their hand with this card. You slam it down on the table and you say, "We're doing this. This is the game now." So what the card actually does is when you play Phoenix Roost, it halves the cost of every card in your hand and every card that enters your hand, and does the same for your opponent. So that's, I think, he did actually mention who wanted it added. I could check on it. But overall, what might give some context to this list, which I'm sure looks very strange to a lot of people, is this list is built around Star Phoenix, or at least that's what he claims. And it makes a lot of sense.
That's what he claims, yes. The claim to fame is Star Phoenix here. I like the name of this deck as well. Do what you want, I don't know. I assume that he means the 5-time world champion, which I think is a tall tale here, is told by Jay-Z. Do what you want, I don't know. That's the deck name. I'm interested to see how this deck plays. Of course, whenever you go out so far out the left field, consistency becomes a big problem, right? Do you even draw the options that you need? But sometimes it just destroys, and I can't wait to see that happen if it does.
I want to see this deck destroy.
Well,
more than anything.
he's not playing. He's not playing any outside combos with Phoenix Roost. I think it's just in there as like a whatever card. But let's not take away from the fact that he's still playing all of the ramp. He still has 3 Bahamut's and a Prince of Darkness and an Ouroboros in there. Okay, so he still has what at its heart would be a ramp dragon list. So I don't think it's going to be too off the wall. Maybe some of the plays will, but the overall strategy will remain what we have come to know and love about Dragon.
The interesting thing is there also is the long forgotten card since, it got hit by a hammer, Lightning Blast, which Sources of Bane or Banish, Suri, not that common. We've talked a lot about Sizoni's decks. Let's take a look at Sheepy's. Are there any weaknesses here that Sizoni can exploit? Is there anything that's relevant for the deck that Sizoni has brought today that he can really take advantage of?
I don't think so. I mean, he's got 2 combo decks, right? We've already talked about it. Queen, Ramp Dragon, and OTK Roach. They just do things fast, and it doesn't look like Sizoni's trying to do anything fast today outside of his Shadow deck. So, I don't know.
Yeah, definitely very tough. And, we mentioned and we talked about these combo decks, how Ward against Forest is super important, or something that can really disrupt the combo and force Dragon to play out its options in defense is something that's very important for a deck that tries to fight it. If any of those were to offer those options, I think it might have been something a little more realistic, but it's going to be difficult for Sizoni's list because Wolf Bolt is slow, right?
But never discount Sizoni, okay? People thought to discount him when he was bringing random stuff like Conjuring Force, and look what he did with it. You know what I mean? So I'm never going to discount Sizoni for playing off-the-wall decks. He knows what he's doing with them, so I give him all the credit in the world.
Well, we'll see how they do. Onion Sheep versus Sizoni. It's going to be Dragon versus Forest to kick things off.
I really like his name is Young Sis.
Oh no. We'll see.
So how do you think Wolf Bolt can do when it doesn't play Roach? It has to play this extremely long control game. Do you think that it can actually outlast a Queen Ramp Dragon deck?
Well, the thing that scares me the most about this is that my memory, mostly, of Wolf Bolt is actually that you don't just win with the double bolt, you win with a 0-cost bolt into a Roach combo. And
Right.
he did mention it was a decision that he made to cut Roach from the list because he wants to win with it. Now where that also brings me, if you're going with that as your win condition, you might want to pack a third bolt or a third white wolf just to get that last damage in there, but running 2 of each. So I
That's
really
right.
can't call this one. It all just comes down to both getting the poke and having the combo just work perfectly for him before Sheepy gets to his.
Yep. And that sounds about right. And Onion Sheep or Sheepy, I don't know how he wants his name to go by anymore. We're just gonna stick it with Sheepy. He has the tools that he wants to see. He's got a staircase on 1 if he wants it. He's got a summoner that will automatically pull an Ayala for him for turn 3. So he's looking pretty good over here.
Mm-hmm. Fairly strong setup, whereas on the side of a young Sizz, I really like that name that he's given himself now. He goes into Fairy Whisperer, but that isn't really a fast setup for Ancient Elf, especially when you're on the draw. So we might see a really, really patient starter from him, which could be really tough to really play with when you're against a fast ticking and explosive deck like Sheepy's Combo Dragon.
Now, I will say that Suzzoni is running 3 Fairy Beasts, so he does have a way to just spike life gain in the end game. He actually elected not to play any Queen for like actual big life gain at the end. Just completely in favor of Fairy Beast, it looks like. Which is interesting to me. Like, why not just play 1 copy instead of 3 Fairy Beasts? You know what? Who cares? Suzzoni's like, I don't care. I don't know.
No. If we're saying that Suzzoni's really like wanting to play decks that are important to him, or decks that he remembers really well, then maybe it's just a matter of like nostalgia. Like back in the day, we didn't have Aaron, we didn't have Elf Queen. All we had for healing in Forest was Fairy Beast, and this goes back to like the very beginning when like PTP Forest was like the thing to watch out for. So perhaps it could be there.
I see. Yeah, he's not playing any cards from like the newest expansions at all. There are no Aarons, there is no Queen, there's no Cassiopeia. Yeah, there's no Airbound Barrage. There's nothing new in this deck whatsoever.
This is the classic home-style Forest. I mean, the latest expansion I see in this is Rage of Bahamut, obviously, for White Wolf and Lily, but yeah. He's really taking it with the retro here.
Yeah. He's like, you know what, this week, guys, I'm going to showcase important stuff to me and my community, and I can still win with these. I know I can. I believe.
It's a history lesson, yeah.
That's right. It's a history lesson. It's a I'm in front of the class speech. It's hey guys, I'm gonna take you through the time capsule of my Shadowverse life, and I'm gonna show you what it means to me, and what these decks mean to me. And I really like that.
I think that really is actually effectively the way Suzzoni's like approaching today. But for the time being, I wouldn't count him out, even though I said that his position is pretty bad here. The very best. I think that he is playing a combo deck that does have a really solid finisher against a deck that he really could potentially get the time to work against.
My only question is, how does he get the 2 damage he needs in beyond like the Silverbolt combo, right? So like if you're relying on 2 Silverbolts and you get both of them in hand, you have a maximum of 18 damage. How do you get the extra 2 chip in when you're not playing Roach?
At this point, I don't have any better answer than you might. I think he just simply looks for it, as in, he tries to find it with the fairies, the other pieces of resources, the little things that he has in between or building up towards the Silverbolt. I mean, he's effectively inflicted one that's gonna get shrugged off, but I think here it just comes down to Suzzoni himself. It's not really a part of the game plan of the deck, he just wants to find it just sort of naturally as he goes along.
Makes sense. And it looks like Onion Sheep's got pretty much every answer he needs at the moment. He's got plenty of Bahamuts to clear boards. He's got more Sybil to gain life. He's got Forte if he wants to be aggressive. And he's got Queen of the Dread Sea if he finds his combo soon enough.
So that's going to be really tough to deal with coming up. I was thinking that Suzzoni might elect to go for Will of the Forest there, but choosing not to means he instead spends an Evo point and trades 3 times into this Sybil.
And then I assume at some point he has to stop playing the cards from his hand so that he can keep it up for the White Wolf Silverbolt combo. Looks like he does not agree.
This is one of the more difficult things about playing Wolf Bolt that I've seen has always sort of been rough on players for a very long time. Is just it takes a very long time to get to the combo, and when you do, the fact that Silverbolt works off of hand size means you really can't just keep playing cards. There needs to be a
Right.
point where you stop. And so here we see he's in a really rough position. He actually does run an answer to this in 2 Crystalia Lilies, I believe, but unfortunately hasn't found one yet, so can only deal with this Bahamut in the most traditional of ways.
I'm surprised to not see any Dance of Death. That's not from a newer set. And Dance of Death, I feel like, would be a really good option for the deck.
Mm-hmm. That actually does put in that exact 2 damage you need for the store later
Right.
once you get the bolt off.
Right, so maybe just an oversight from Sizzo. We'll say that. Maybe you just
Mhm.
forgot that Dance of Death was a card.
That could be. I mean, it's Darkness Evolved, right? I don't want to say it's classic. I'm like 90% sure it's Darkness Evolved.
Yeah, that I'm not sure of. It's funny to watch the players on camera too. Sizzo's like completely relaxed, having a lot of fun. Sheepy over here, on the other hand, is just like, okay, optimal line of play. What am I doing here? Okay, what's the perfect use of my play points this turn?
Sizzo actually just looks so happy. I mean, is he talking to someone? Is there someone listening to him? I wish I
I
could
don't know.
hear
Maybe he's just singing. Maybe that's what it is. He just listened to his favorite song, jamming out, singing out loud.
I bet Sizzo's a really good singer, actually. And look at him. He has the face of one. But it's sort of like, despite his really good mood, despite how good his sandwich looks and how envious I am of how good his sandwich looks, I don't think he's in a good spot here. I think he's in the very opposite of a good spot here.
Very opposite of a good spot. No way to really deal with any of the threats that Onion Sheep has. Does have Fairy Beasts to start gaining some life. But I mean, even with all that life gain, I mean, when you're talking about threats like Bahamut and Genesis Dragon, the life gain really doesn't matter too much.
Yeah. Unfortunately, even though I do really respect the general outlook of the deck, I really love White Wolf as a card. I love Wolf Bolt as a win condition. I think the way this whole deck works and how it has kind of fallen off lately is just kind of down to the fact that it's not very versatile. It doesn't really have effective answers to a lot of very fast threats that other decks have lately, which sort of explains how Forest has really shifted towards a lot of its other ways of winning games, usually just Roach, the fastest it can be now.
Right. And or the extreme aggro plan with Hyperias and things like that, which I really like. I still think it's a very strong deck. All right, Sizzo, it's time to pull out your dragon deck now. All right?
It's time to take the training weights off. Like,
That's right. Time to bust out the big guns, bring what you came here to bring. Let's go.
mhm. Now, how confident are you feeling about Siz's ability to kind of carry this friendship spirit bomb through?
You know what? I think he can pull a game off with it. I think that Forest is one of those decks that you can always steal games off of because they are very card draw dependent. And if they don't have it, they just don't have it and give you time to use it. I don't think that the Lightning Blasts are going to help too much, which might stuff them up in the late game, but Ouroboros might be an insane tool to finish out a game.
Indeed. Ouroboros is not a card we've seen for a long time. I only recently realized the significance of it costing 8 and having 8 attack.
Yes.
It just completely missed me for the longest time. But
That's a
hopefully I opened someone else's eyes by just mentioning that. So that was an interesting mulligan. Usually when I see Dragon as a class have Ayala in the opening hand, I then promptly see it mull everything but Ayala. But he did toss it this time.
Sure. Really, it just depends on, do you think it's going to be relevant in the matchup? I think Ayala against Force is almost always relevant because they have to kill it in fair ways and not unfair ways. Maybe he was just looking for something more specific, like maybe a board wipe, or maybe just different options in the early game, which he did get. So he's definitely not at a loss for things to play here.
Yeah. Guess one anyway. He could potentially be looking for the star piece of the deck, Star Phoenix, try to get that engine going as quickly as possible.
Yes. Or Phoenix Roost. Generally, when you play Phoenix Roost in your deck, you kind of want to play it as fast as possible so you can get the advantage out of it.
Mm-hmm. I fear for him if he does play it this game, though. I feel like Phoenix Roost is probably it's probably a really, really tough card that you just can't really play versus Forest.
Well,
Similar
it's
to
like
the
playing
reason
against
why you can't-
D-Shift or...
Yeah.
You make all their cards cost half the amount, it means their combos go off that much faster.
Can't keep relying on you, Dragon.
Well, only one copy of it. It's not really the centerpiece of the deck. I guess at the moment we really just have to approach it as It is a control dragon list. It has very heavy finishers, like Cetus here. If
Yeah,
those,
Sidus
for those who
being one
don't
of
know.
the premier dragon followers.
We see him a lot. He's really made his debut in tournament play with a bang. 9 cost, 6/7. As a fanfare, he eats your opponents. I believe it's their lowest cost follower in play.
Randomly, one of their lowest cost followers.
Yes.
So you
He's
don't
just
even
hungry.
get to choose.
Yeah, he just looks for one.
Yep.
Though worth noting, maybe Cetus will find his time and really shine in the future. Just because I think cards that remove something as they enter play are always relevant. Tsubaki or things like that. But we might not really see it like as the central star here.
Sure. And I think that's why Suzzoni only chose to include one of it in his deck today.
Right.
A nice little option, you know, a 9-drop to kill a 1-drop works anytime.
Though I think like the ideal time for Cetus, I've actually lost to him in Take 2 before, is that sometimes the most you can afford is to have just one huge body on board. I mean, let's say you played Bahamut, or your opponent drafted Bahamut, and that sucks for you, because how would you really deal with him aside from like Mr. Full Moon? Cetus is actually a pretty solid answer for
That's
that like
true.
one situation.
That's true.
The hunt has
And it
only
could technically deal with Hyperia if it's the only thing left in play and you're at 9 play points, so it does give you a way to do things to ambush cards that you wouldn't otherwise have access to.
It's a really interesting card just in that if the power level of the game were to one day hit a pretty low point, then I think cards, maybe not Cetus itself, but cards with similar effects to Cetus could actually really kind of be seen in play.
I, to this day, don't think that we see enough ambush to make cards like that relevant, though. We see them used very effectively in Sword and in Forest. We actually saw a lot of our OTK Roach players bringing 2 Hyperias in what would be considered standard Roach today, just because of how powerful they've been seeing it in aggro. I said this since the set came out, actually. Hyperia as a 1 of or a 2 of an OTK Roach just makes your comboing turn so much easier. Dealing 15 damage is a lot easier than 20.
Right. I think that just really highlights the absolute power of ambush as a mechanic. I thought about it in my head and I realized if you took ambush and kind of cut it in half, like just split it down on a chopping board, you would actually turn it into 2 other mechanics in the game. The can't be targeted, as seen in Hulking Giant and a lot of cards in Haven like Main U, and can't be attacked from Dragon. You literally just kind of glue these things together and it turns into ambush. The only downside it then gets is if it attacks, it loses it. But in a game that's as fast as Shadowverse can be, often just getting one attack or having a follower that can guarantee it stays on the board and attacks is really the gateway to a lot of possibilities.
Let's see, is there a lethal setup this turn? So he can do 1 with a snipe, play Roach for 2 damage, so that's 3, bounce it, play it for 4 damage, so that's 7, plus
And then he
5
has
is
5
12,
on
plus
board.
Evo is 14, so he's actually just 2 away from lethal already.
He's close, but I would say if he doesn't have it, it does force him to stop and deal with the Sybil for now.
It does, and he's just like just around the play points to deal with it super effectively, like with Athena plus Sylvan Justice or something like that.
It's actually pretty interesting. He's in a pretty weird spot.
Yeah, this is
I
a really
guess-
weird spot.
Toss Sylvan Justice, and then that just makes the trade clean for him. Loses the damage, but can't be helped. Oh,
Oh, looks
Says
like he's
forget
gonna
about it.
ignore it. Yeah.
I won't
To be
let
honest,
you
the
get
3
away.
extra health isn't that big of a deal right now, and it's right before turn 10, before something crazy can happen. So I really like this play from Onion Sheep. He's like, you know what, I'm going to dig down. I have lethal set up for next turn. I don't care about that 3 extra life gain. And I think it's really going to pay off here.
right. Meanwhile, Suzzoni is very happy because I think we're about to see very, very rare footage of Cetus getting a pretty decent amount of value. This is his debut in tournament play. I didn't even know it had the Dance of Death animation on it. But
Doesn't even play it in the appropriate way, I believe, which would have been to attack the Hyperia first, but gets lucky anyway. Is able to deal the 6 damage, and while leaving huge threats on board. But I'm pretty sure we already know that Onion Sheep has lethal in hand.
right. He has the ability to pull a Roach. the bounce. I think this is just going to be one of the classic pull, roach, bounce, roach, roach that I think always does, what, 3, 5, 7?
Yeah, I think we're at the exact 14 mark. Well, actually, no, with only 1 0 cost.
Oh yeah,
It's
you
not
need
the
2
full,
0
it's not the
costs
full
for 3,
14.
5.
You need 2. So he's actually another turn off now after making that play.
Is it still possible if he just uses the Angelic Snipe for 1 damage? I think there might be... Huh.
I don't think so. I think it's max damage. When you count the 0 cost cards in your hand, I think that is counting what your max damage could be, because nothing else can be cheaper than that.
I see.
But yeah, even with the Angelic Snipe, it's because you need all 7 play points to cast both roaches and to bounce and play the 3rd roach. That takes up all of your play points, so you can only play 0 costers before it.
No stopping this lad.
And I think we see on Sheepy's face him regretting not killing the Sybil now.
Yeah, that pushes him up to 17. Still no second 0 cost or anything like it. I think that's still just out of range. I'm counting it right off the top of my head. So Angelic Snipe brings him to 16 effective defense.
And then he
Goblin
has
Mage
14
is a
to
second
attack
breaker.
after it.
Yeah.
So
We
only able
may
to deal
see.
15. Ugh.
We may actually see Sizone pull it through. The people of the earth giving him their energy.
With
on
Cetus
the
being
back.
played, okay, for full value.
As I said before, never underestimate this very specific effect of a card that removes something as it enters play. That is like the very definition of a tempo swing. I mean, when we saw it there, it wasn't too far off of a Chimera with a much, much larger body.
That's the thing to consider about it. So, like, you might be wondering, you know, why not Odin or why not something else? Cetus has a huge body attached to it. It might cost 1 more, but a 6/7 is much bigger than a 4/3 or anything else that comes down that does a similar effect.
Yeah, when there's no Evo points left for your opponent, those different ticks and points of damage matter. Sheepy just lost one of his roaches here.
It's good. Still has 2, so it's not like the game's over, but Sizone has all of the Sibyls in the world and an Ouroboros to just win over the course of 2 turns. And I think after seeing that roach played, if I'm Sizone, I just go hard with my Ouroboros here.
I agree. Oh, doesn't though.
However, playing Sibyl's turn after turn with your opponents out of Evo points isn't bad either. I mean, having Ouroboros just be the ender after a Sybil hits is perfectly fine too.
Right. I agree with this play perfectly fine. I mean, if he restores himself to full defense and has another 4 or 5 that Sheepy needs to deal with, then really how does he lose? I think that's the line of thought behind it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Sizone actually has this one under wraps now. And mostly because of that Cetus play, believe it or not.
It was the Cetus that actually just like slammed in through Onion. Sheep's hole. It just drove a gigantic hole into it, really. Like, it was not just a 6/7. That took his Evo point. That was an 8/9.
That was a
Sheepy,
huge dude. That was a huge dude.
It was a big boy, to say the very least. And Sheepy actually got really lucky with the Cassiopeia to take its injured body off the board, because if that had survived in lieu of a Sybil, I suppose he wouldn't have gotten the healing the next turn. But with
And
Sybil coming up
Sizzo
so
appropriately
close,
walks away from the table before lethal here.
so what's he communicating here? What's he trying
I
to
think
tell
he's
us?
communicating, do I have lethal here? I think I do. Did I win with this deck? I think I did. Hey, everybody. Relax with me. I play Cetus, you can play Cetus too and win competitive Shadowverse.
Yeah, I think it's worth taking a screen cap of this exact situation and post it up as a lethal puzzle to your friends.
That's right. How do I actually execute lethal here?
Nice marksmanship.
Right, and Ouroboros, the final shot it takes. Young Sizz has actually achieved a win over OTK Forest with his Friendship Spirit Bomb Dragon list.
That's right. And now, can he do it with his slower White Wolf Forest without roaches?
That is a very tough question, considering...
That's a tall order. I think it's a much taller order than what we just saw.
Mhm.
I guess the real question is, and this is something that we actually saw earlier today, is how many Tias is he running? He's running 2 Tias, and he's running 3 Ancient Elves. So, there is a world in where Suzzoni just plays the defensive ward game and just wins because of it.
We've seen it happen. This
We've seen it happen.
this matchup can easily be mistaken for a matchup where if you get to your combo first, you win. But we've already seen it today that there is this hint of a possibility that there's a much different and broader method of approaching the matchup. If you can just acquire control of the board, not even necessarily in the early game, but in the late game so that your opponent's combo is just never going to cut it and they have to throw pieces away, then you can actually turn it into a bit of a resource grinder.
Yep. And they both have the tools to do it. Sizzo has a way to get through all of this ward shenanigans though with the bolt. So if it does come down to a smash off of who can lay down the biggest ward and the biggest threat, I think Suzzoni might actually have the edge as the game goes later.
Mm-hmm. I mean, even now, he's on the draw, and his deck is a lot more generative of resources with cards like Fairy Whisperer than his Onion Sheeps.
Mm-hmm. Interesting to see the Elf Child may not come down and the Fairy Generation instead, with the threat of Ancient Elf. And now that the Ancient Elf threat has been played, I think Sizzo's in a terrible spot. This is one of those plays that you're just like, oh crap, they got it. They got the sweet, sweet Ancient Elf on 3 as a 4/5. Ouch.
Yeah. At the very best, I could see if he were to find an Elven Princess Mage or something along those lines. I'll check to see if he runs it, because with Sizzo, I can't really be sure. That could activate Tia and be a pretty big swing. He runs 3 copies, he does. But otherwise, it is a very tough spot to be in. It's never... I haven't seen this in forever. And I kind of forgot how much it just pains me sometimes, but on the play Ancient Elf as a follow-up to Fairy Circle, there are very few things in the game that actually answer this effectively.
Right, especially on the draw. If you're on the play, you can deal with it with things like Tribunal. You can mix and match, different removal spells with different followers you have in play, but you always have to give up resources for something that they didn't have to give up resources for, which feels bad.
Mm-hmm.
Like, playing a follower, evoing it, and running something else into it just to deal with it, after it's already dealt all its damage, rough. And then Onion Sheep has the follow-up with Hyperia and Double Roach. I think he's just gonna run away with this game.
Mm-hmm. And even short of having to use Hyperia here, he can actually just develop his Fina as well, get a 0 cost, then develop Hyperia, and he has the time to.
That's right. And with Suzzoni doesn't have a lot of cheap followers in hand to actually get use out of these Tias at any appropriate time here. And Fairy Beast being very good, Fairy Beast could actually put him back up to full health. So he's not like technically just out of the water yet, but I don't see him. Well, you know what? I'm gonna reserve judgment. You know what? Forget everything I'm saying right now. Suzzoni has a chance.
You gotta believe in the boy here.
Gotta believe in him.
So he's got options at the very least, like you said. I think the most unfortunate thing that's actually giving him the hardest time is just that he doesn't have a very clear path to activating these Tias. I think they're the most important card in his hand by far.
However, if Onion Sheep keeps electing to go this slower paced, I'm going to build up combo route, this could give Suzzoni the window he needs to start getting those Tias online. And if that happens, we know how that game plays out. At least we've seen it earlier today. And with backed up by Fairy Beast to actually pump you back up to full after the wards come out, there's not even the consideration of, my ward pops and then I die to like an outside Roach lethal combo that I didn't do the math for or something like that.
Right. At the very least, I know Sheepy is a very consistent calculative player. I know he thinks about his plays for a really, really long time. Sometimes to the point of a little timer we can't see. I don't think that he would... I don't think he'd miss too often something like a Roach lethal if he has the time and space to think about it. But it's really important that he not in this kind of a matchup, because it's not like young Sizzo's deck doesn't have a win condition here.
All right, here we see it. And I think this is going to prompt an immediate Fairy Beast from Suzzoni. I don't think he can afford not to play it here.
Right. Knowing your opponent has a 0-cost Goblin Mage, being at 14 defense, it really limits your options in terms of being able to defend otherwise. He could Will of the Forest, though.
He could Will of the Forest. This does open him completely up to a combo, though. On turn 7, which is the combo turn. And he's exactly at 14. However, again, like we've said, he only has one 0-cost card in hand at the moment. So can't actually get to 14.
And his bounce is not really ideal. Although I talked Pixie Mischief up a lot, it's a very useful and very high utility kind of card. Its only flaw we're seeing here is it's not actually that effective of a bounce on its own, so looks like she'd be going to go for the Ancient Elf route and just poke a bit.
Also effectively leaving that Tia in play, which we know Suzzoni already has a backup for, but it's interesting, a lot of our players today, if not every player today, is just unaffected by this card. They're just like, you know what, I'll leave it in play, I don't really care, which I find very interesting. It's not something that you normally see.
Now, if I were to check his list, I would be able to tell you. Right. He actually does not run any source other than Ancient Elf of bouncing. So I suppose there is a lot more logic to Sheepy here leaving it alive, because he knows if he plays Ancient Elf, then he would have to have another 1-cost follow-up on turn 9 to really play it again. But still.
That's true. But even bouncing it with an Ancient Elf is an insanely strong play at this stage of the game, because again, it just puts you ward after ward after ward, which is exactly where you want to be in an endgame versus OTK Roach.
Now I find this to be an interesting turn for Sheepy as well. So speaking of late game positions, he's primed to get his combo off, but I don't think this is going to be enough damage for him by any means. Doesn't have the perfect bounce. And Pixie Mischief doesn't exactly give Suzzoni back things that I think Sheepy would be willing to let him have.
Right,
So
it's got to kind of be
just
the finisher. Yeah.
Shine on, crystals.
But he is setting up for a good endgame. I mean, his opponent's at 17, not at full health at the moment. And he does have essentially triple Roach with bounces in hand. So he just needs to wait until he can accumulate lethal damage. However...
So it goes. This happens sometimes, that's the way it is. Yeah. So what does White Wolf now pull, now that both Silver Bolts are out of his deck? The answer is another Fairy Beast, which could be good for him. It could be good for him, but at the same time, this is now going to take a pretty long while. I can guarantee this. Because once you've pulled both Silver Bolts, you don't have a combo anymore. You're just aiming massive pieces of turn-ending burn damage at your opponent, effectively.
That's right. And right now, Suzzoni doesn't really have enough cards in his hand to outright go for it, unless these threats stick. And they might, depending on what Onion Sheep does here. I mean, his only responses here, he can Aaron and Evolve to go over the Tia. Or he can run a Roach into it, which, he can afford to lose a Roach, but I don't think he wants to at this point. Right. I guess he could just pass, too. He could just pass, but that leaves up the opportunity for Suzzoni to get a 8 damage in next turn if there is a removal for this Aaron.
Yeah, and something that's kind of rough about passing is something that is kind of difficult to see is Sizzo's board is actually an amazing setup for an Ancient Elf if he had one. It reactivates the Tia and fills his hand back up for the Silver Bolts.
It's absolutely true. And electing to not do this, I mean, we do see that there's a Lily in hand. Lily can effectively deal with this very easily. Wilberforce can with an attacker as well.
The forest is crying for help. Stop.
This does get more cards out of hand and makes Silverbolt a little bit worse, though, doing it this way.
Right. Seems like a pretty massive committal there. I suppose he didn't want to try to aim for hitting in his Wolf and then trading his Tia away as well, but I think he is starting to run out of ways to actually keep this board together. He only has 3 defense on his ward.
And I think Onion Sheep, with that immediate playing of his 0-cost Goblin Mage, has already counted out lethal. With Angelic Snipe and triple Roaches and plenty of 1-cost cards, I think he might easily be there.
How does he get through the 6-3 though, I wonder? I suppose he can throw away one of his Roaches on it, and then...
You can throw away a Roach, or you can Evo a Fairy that you play. I don't think you need the Evo point at this point. We're at 10 play points.
I suppose just Evoing the Fairy here. He has a Nature's Guidance. I think that just makes it a 5-6-7.
Yep, and then Nature's Guidance, and then Roach, or Fairy, Roach. Either works.
6, 7, 8. Yeah. Well, unfortunate. Sizzo did have a bit of a chance and he managed to get the game pretty far, but I think he just ended up kind of wheedling out of his own win condition.
Right. And Suzzoni, happy as a clam to lose. Onion Sheep getting another point on the board here.
That was actually incredibly close.
That was super
If
close.
he drew the silver bolt, the fact that he drew the first one was actually really good. The fact that he drew the second one slammed the door shut on him.
I know.
He made it to turn 9, which means he could have played both silver bolts on top of each other. And the fantastic thing about silver bolt is it recycles itself. And so having that double damage after that white wolf came down. Oh my god. I can't believe it was as close as it was.
That's what I think. I think Mofu hit the nail on the head before the game started. If you're planning on winning with that engine, I think you just need to make sure that you have more of it, because it is such a late game card and a late game way to win that you can just naturally draw it. Like we saw him draw both the silver bolts, and then, like you said, gone.
This is why he specifically, don't recommend you run 3 silver bolts. Do recommend you run at least 1 extra elephant. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe
the
rating.
king elephant.
I don't know.
It goes through wards, man. The elephant just...
I vote for Forest Gygus.
Yeah, oh,
I like that.
Forest Gygus is a good one, but you need that damage from hand. But Sizoni takes the loss to Onion Sheep. Does win, and by the way, it is indeed Onion Sheep. Is the name that he will henceforth be known as. Onion Sheep goes 2-2, and Sizoni drops down to 2-2. Close shave. And that's going to leave Group B at 3-0 for Akamaru Red, 3-1 for Meow, 2-2 for Onion Sheep, 2-2 for Sizoni, 1-3 for Matt Allen, and Das V at 0-3, which sets up our last match here. The only 2 players that have not played this week, Akamaru Red and Das V. So, let's take a look. Let's take a look at the match and see what's going to happen here in this match. Nice picture, Akamaru. Very, he's got a very compelling expression there. Dragoncraft and Shadow is going to be what Akamaru fields with Rune banned out, and Dasvi has Blood and Forest with Dragon banned out. Talk to me a little bit about the lists, Exo. What are we looking to see here?
Well, Akamaru Red is playing what you would expect from him. He's getting very straightforward with how he plays. It's still impressive to me that he still hasn't managed to lose by playing exactly what you would expect him to play. Today he's going to be playing Ramp Dragon and Mid Shadow. And Das V is bringing Neutral Forest and Control Blood. So I think I'm going to call it this week. I think that Das V, being the only player who hasn't gotten a point yet, and Akamaru Red, the only undefeated player, I think this is going to be an upset. I think Das V can pull it with his deck choices today to actually beat Akamaru Red, especially if he's done his homework and knows how he plays his specific turns out, because Akamaru Red is a very straightforward player. You know exactly what he's doing. Sometimes it's just too good for you to deal with, but I think if you understand his game plan, you can get around it, and I think Das V has the decks that can do it.
And certainly we've seen Control Blood fight against Ramp Dragon in these long extended fights, and a lot of it actually I feel like comes down to cards in deck, right? And how little draw you can play, or at least stay 1 card above your opponent. Let's take a look at the Dragoncraft deck that Akamaru Red is bringing. Now this is a card that comes in and out, and I think through different variations of Ramp Dragon is either included or excluded, but let's talk about Polyphonic Roar. Late game, it's an engine to continuously provide instantly attacking big dragons, right? How does this fit into this matchup, Mofu? How do you feel about this as a card?
I really still feel weird about Polyphonic Roar. I'm surprised it's come to the point that we're talking about it, but we've seen it a lot. So I think what makes this card so attractive and what makes it so powerful sometimes is when you have a card that can't really be traded into. It's an amulet, which is very strange. Dragon doesn't really get much value off of amulets usually. That guarantees damage every single turn, then it becomes one of the single most dangerous finishers you could really imagine existing. The fact that Wind Blast Dragons have Storm means if your opponent ever doesn't play around 5 damage, and it's hard to play around 5 damage, considering you have to remove it every turn, then it can just be such a solid finisher that it doesn't really surprise me that it makes the cut across all these other sort of win game or end game win conditions that this deck has.
And certainly kind of putting that into the context of a Control Blood matchup, I actually kind of like that because it adds 1 more target that Emeralda has to think about. Whereas traditionally in that matchup, Emeralda is very well set up to take down the other big bodies that Ramp Dragon provides. Exo, what do you think about its inclusion here?
Well, honestly, I think the inclusion of Polyphonic Roar is fine. It just gives you a win condition against unknowns, right? The interesting thing I find about this deck actually is the number of the cards in the deck. So, Draconic Fervor as a 2 of, Grimnir as a 2 of, Goblin Breaker Tina as a 2 of. Of course, you play Tina over Dragon Warrior because of the Dragon Summoner thing. Dragon Summoner, you want to pull your Dragon followers, your ramp, like your Aeolas and your Sibyls and things like that. But playing a little less of what we would expect, like 2 Fervors seems really sketchy to me in any Dragon list. Not having your ramp in Dragon is like the worst thing that can possibly happen, and playing less of it feels like maybe he's just confident that his curve's good enough without the ramp. Also playing 3 Staircase instead of 3 Summoners, so electing to go a little bit more for that super late game advantage than trying to get his mid game advantage going a little bit faster.
How much do you think this is a read on Akamaru Red's side that he thinks Dasvi was going to play the slower game? And so he says, well, if it's a slower game over the period of X amount of turns that is greater than 20, right? Maybe that early ramp is not going to matter as much. And so he says, I'm going to tune my deck a little differently for that.
I mean, that perfectly makes sense. Like we've seen in the matchups past, a lot of times you can't play your Fervors or your Belphegors or whatever it might be if you're behind on cards, or even if you're ahead on cards, so you don't catch back up with how many cards in deck is left for your opponent. So maybe just he didn't want to have the option of having 3 Fervors, maybe unplayable cards in the matchups that he's playing. So it could be a very heads-up choice as well.
And just for clarity, for maybe some of the new players out there, if you end up drawing a card when you have no more cards in deck, you instantly lose the game. So that is what we are talking about when we're saying you need to be wary of this, because Control Blood versus Ramp Dragon, very prone to getting to that situation. So, not going to start up on that matchup, Control Blood versus Shadow, and let's see how this unfolds.
That's right, Mofu. Do you think that Shadow has gained any ground against Control Blood?
Now that's really interesting just because, I mean, in my memory of Shadow versus Control, which is something that we've seen many, many times, both in NGE, we've seen it happen in Rage often. I think Shadow's a really, really hard one to actually dissect, because what other class has so many tools of value between Demon Eater and Soul Conversion? It never runs out of cards in hand. It never runs out of threats, it feels like, after it hits turn 7. And it's always within just a strong enough level of board stickiness that it actually seems like it's a mid-range deck that handles Control in a lot of other matchups just fine. As for dealing with Control Blood, I feel like I have seen this a million times and I still don't know where I would put my coin.
That's interesting. Yeah, I don't know either. I think that Control Blood has a slight edge if it gets the right cards. Of course, we've talked about the correct cards, right? Diabolic Drains and Righteous Devils and things like Revelations in order to board clear turn after turn. But like you said, Shadow has more tools than most of the decks to keep coming back, right? They've got Ektars, they've got Thanes, they've got Prince Catacombs to just keep flooding the board over and over and over again. And it's very telling to see somebody like Akamaru Red, last season's champion, this season's only undefeated player so far, bringing it every single week, even though it's around Robin and his opponents know that he's going to be bringing it.
Yeah, and I think that could actually just be part of how Mid Shadow is a deck that's not really difficult to see coming. It doesn't really do anything that unpredictable. Even just with the variance of maybe random effects in the deck, maybe Lurching Corpse at best adds a little bit of a variance. But for the most part, you know what it's going to do in the mid game. It's going to have a board and you're not going to be able to do anything about it. And you know that the 7 drops are coming and you probably won't be able to do anything about it. I think that is what lends Shadow to being a class where it's consistent, it's strong, and you can keep bringing it time and time again. And unless people really genuinely try to run some oddball cards to counter it, like Calamitous Curse or Acolyte Slight or otherwise, then you're probably not going to be as prepared for it as you'd like. So I think it just comes down to it's difficult to prepare for this matchup, and that's why people who like consistent game plans like Akamaru Red are so attracted to bringing it over and over.
Yep, and as we see it, talking about its consistency, not getting the most of consistent draws here, getting all of his 7 drops essentially in his early beginning here, not being able to generate a ton of shadows, hasn't gotten through a lot of cards yet. It does have some options now with the Lurching Corpse and the Demon Eater and Soul Conversion and things, but very slow game plan. Even so slow, Dasvi's like, I'm going to play this Belphegor on 4, because I'm not afraid.
Right. I think it's actually extremely unlikely that a hand like Akamaru Red's happens, that's half of the win conditions in the deck in his top 8 cards. But even so, as I mentioned, with the sheer amount of card draw options in Shadow between these two cards, Conversion and Demon Eater, you'll see that Shadow always has something else to look for and something else to do. I think it's one of the classes that most rarely will ever show you an actual, like a weak turn, really.
I think it's very important and significant to point out that Das V decided to Evo the Righteous Devil there. I feel like you could have just played out the Righteous Devil and Diabolic drained the threat, and then just had it be a threat stay in play. Because once you Evo it, you give the option to Akamaru Red to being able to do exactly what you just see here in Soul Squash.
Yeah, something also worth noting there is, if he Evos it because he's afraid and he wants his defense back, he puts himself out of Vengeance in exchange for what? So he dodges a lot of reach, but Akamaru Red's actually one of the only players I see breaking mid-shadow who never compromises the list to run Phantom Howl. Well, maybe once he tried it, but I've never seen him run Cerberus, so that reach isn't there.
And we see Das V overdrawing because he's not utilizing the threats in such a way to get the cards out of his hand fast. So he might be discarding or banishing cards from the top of his deck that we don't even know that could be really very relevant in this matchup. And like you said, when he gained the life last turn off of Righteous Devil, what kind of a spot did that actually put him in? It put him out of Vengeance, so he doesn't really have a good way to spend his resources this turn. And it's kind of allowing Akamaru Red time to just set up now.
Even in a situation like this, where he's really started to develop his 7-cost win conditions and the like, I've noticed Dasvi actually has one card here that he didn't choose to play. That is an okay answer to this. Bloodhungry Matriarch actually deals with this pretty well, but goes for the perfect answer, doesn't want to spend an Evo point. We're seeing Dasvi play really, really conservatively here.
Yeah, super conservatively. I think honestly the option with the Righteous Devil was just he knows he was a little scared putting himself down to 10 and just wanted immediately to get that life back to feel more comfortable. And it's not the worst thing. It's just I don't like the overdrawing that he's gotten himself into. I don't like losing pieces, especially against Shadow, because a lot of times you need every resource you have. You know, if those were 2 revelations that he discarded off the top of his deck, you know what I mean? Like, how do you actually win the end game when your board clears are gone? Things like that. So it's important to note.
Yeah, and that makes a special sense considering I think I may have seen Dasvi sort of try this approach before to mid-shadow. I feel like I've at least seen Control Blood players try this very often, where they try to turn mid-shadow versus Control into a pure resource grind. They actually just accept the challenge of, alright, play all your win conditions, I'm not going to die to it, and then you're going to run out of things other than just card draw on your deck. That's how I'm going to win. I feel like maybe it could be Enemy's popularity that made people notice that that was possible. People aren't running things that end the game like Tyrants anymore. But it's interesting, and I'm really like interested in seeing how that actually ends up working out.
Well, as we saw in a previous week, one of Mid-Shadow's greatest tools against a deck like Control Blood can be Tyrant. Because it's just this one effect in your deck that after all is said and done, resource trading and board wipes and you name it, if you're at 13 or less, you're just dead.
Right. Though it really is characteristic of Akamaru Red that as I said before, I don't really see him cutting 4 cards with sort of stranger or more situational effects here.
Yeah, God, no. I mean, he's not playing any of the Serbs, any of the Phantom Howls. No, definitely Tyrant, just very straightforward mid-shadow. Every card you'd expect to see in the deck.
And just now, we saw Dasvi spend his 2nd evolution point the very same way he spent the first one, for healing and kind of keeping his defense as high as possible for the Righteous Devil. I find it really interesting that he chooses to go for that, though.
I do. I mean, like, when you're playing against an aggressive deck, a mid-range deck, whatever, I mean, you play Righteous Devils, using all of your Evo points on them, it's the best Evo target in your deck. So I don't mind it at all. I think it still puts him in a really great spot. He doesn't have to worry about his life for a long time after doing things like that. And you don't really need to use your Evo points a lot in Blood because most of the cards come down and do their job without Evoing.
Though, also pretty interesting to me is, like, when I see Dasvi going for, like, the grinder or pressure game here, it makes me wonder, is he, like, if he plays so much for life during the, like, mid and early game, that it makes me wonder if he also intends to use as many clear tools as possible, or whether he might be waiting for Akamaru Red to play something like Prince Catacomb first before he drops them. It's really interesting to watch how he decides to use his tools.
Yep. I really like this line. You could have revved this turn, but again, revving when it's not something like a Thane. I think you save revs almost exclusively for Thanes, now that I think about it, because it's the only way to fully clear them without using an Evo point, and you don't take any damage from it, right? So I think every rev goes to a Thane, and then if you can deal with Ektar boards outside of that, great.
Right. In addition, I think it's very funny that he also played that turn out very peculiarly, so as to try to get a mill off of Akamaru Red. Not to very much value, but it still is it's still so interesting to me to see. He's very clearly established a game plan so far, and he's not diverting from it at all.
Right. I find it interesting that Akamaru Red chose to evolve to kill this turn. Because if I'm thinking, you know, this is still early on the game, there's still plenty of board wipes that can happen. This just makes it even easier, and I'm throwing away an Evo point, kind of. Like, the 4 damage, how relevant is the 4 damage from the Emeralda, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to use your Evo point like that and not deal face damage with it, kind of suspect to me.
Right. So what are you afraid of when you're playing against Dazvi's list here? Because we can see the game plan from him coming out pretty clearly, because we know what he has in hand. But I wonder what kind of impression it puts on Akamaru Red here. What are you trying to play against?
Well, the thing is, if you look at the deck list, I mean, Spawn of the Abyss is something that has to be in play before it goes off, right? Azazel's not something you can ever comfortably play if you're Dazvi, unless you already have something like a Spawn of the Abyss in play. Temptress Vampires can always come out and things like that, but if they play a Temptress Vampire, you still have the rest of your board. So I'm not really worried about that. There's not a world in my mind where I Evo to kill that Emeralda. But we'll see. We'll see if this actually pays off for him.
Once again, interesting. To speak of him using Spawn as one of the main win conditions of the list, I feel like against Shadow, that may have been, just right after the Diabolic Drain, one of the safest moments he could have landed it, but he chooses to clear again, this time using Bloodhungry Matriarch.
Right. I think Dazvi is just, he's playing that, I'm going to take the slowest possible approach, outvalue every single thing that Akamaru Red's doing. I think he's just in that mindset, and that's not going to change.
It might end up becoming a little scary, because I feel like that was actually a pretty solid setup. He had an evolution point left over. I think he actually had a potential Azazel setup. But once again, doesn't want to leave anything up to like some massive commitment like that, it seems.
Well, what's funny is Akamaru Red didn't have an answer to it, but just freshly drew a Necro Assassin that could have dealt with the Spawn of the Abyss there. So lucky that he didn't do it.
It must be... This is actually a pretty interesting situation, because how often do you have to play around Bloodhungry Matriarch? There's only even one copy of it in Dazvi's list.
You just don't. If they have it, they have it.
It didn't really have such a... Yeah, it didn't really have a super massive impact. It even just felt like something like Thane actually provides a lot more value on the same general sense of time. It's like the because of how Dazvi has chosen to play, all the damage he puts out, even with a card like that, doesn't really advance his game plan very far.
So another thing here, it's just about expenditure of resources, right? Like, Dazvi's running out, but Akamaru Red didn't necessarily need to play the White King there. He could have just played, he could have been satisfied with just the 2/2s and the 1/2, and that has to be respected just as much. The extra 4/5 is just giving value to Dazvi to wipe away with Revelation.
Right. Even with the zombie party committed, it found a lot of value in the Skull Beast as well, because that's enough pressure. Dazvi has to clear the board anyway.
Yeah. But now giving the White King up as well is just one extra resource that he's down. Now, saying that, right now Akamaru Red has access to more of his fills than Dazvi has to his wipes, but Akamaru Red doesn't know that. So I doubt he's just going to start laying out these Ektars.
It reminds me a lot of what we saw in Rage and how Japanese players tend to approach mid-shadow, is even though it is a mid-range deck, if you're against control, it just completely switches archetypes. I'm a control deck now too.
Right, right. And it's these pivotal turns, right? Like, you know, your opponent's already used 2 Revelations. They've already used their Blood-Hungry Matriarch. What are you really afraid of by playing the Ektar? Just losing out on the ability to do what, right? Like, you're never really going to stick a huge board, right? If you are, you're probably winning the game anyway. You probably don't need the extra damage from Ektar. And if you never take the stab at it, you might just be giving the control deck plenty of time to draw their last rev, to draw all the cards that they need to finish the game out.
And in addition to that kind of game plan, that was a really interesting turn to see from that. He evaluated his series as not going to be a part of that game plan of attrition. He doesn't really need the life, because something like Azazel would be the finisher here anyway. So he tosses it to look for something else, but I'm thinking the most important tool for Akamaru Red to find, if he were to go for a play like that, is probably going to be Prince Catacomb alongside some of the smaller pieces, like a zombie generator like Zombie Party, or his Skull Beasts even.
Right. So I like this play again. I just want to see him not commit the White King here. Doesn't need to.
To not elect to run Dark Blade Fiend and the like does mean that the Thanes are going to be the only source of wards in the deck, and it's not really easy to get to them through it.
Right. Right. So I like this play. This, of course, plays right into Hungering Horde, but you can't really not play into that with Zombie Party. And I think Dasvi's recognizing that he's now pushing Akamaru Red against the ropes. And I think he's identifying that, especially with evoing the Baphomet there. That's saying something.
And very nice that he evolved to split the stats, understands that he still hasn't seen one of the little soul squashers, so denies a lot of value there. And
this is an interesting setup. He's got Temptress Vampire in hand for a lethal setup next turn if either of these followers stay alive. If Akamaru Red wants to deal with this, he's got to do something like Ektar plus Evolve, or something plus a Necro Assassin after an Evolve.
I think he's going for it due to the commitment of the White King.
Maybe this is an Ektar play.
Yeah, I think this is an absolutely devastating Ektar play. He has to make this call that Dasvi's out of evolution points, and he's seen a lot of clears so far.
Yeah, the Evo on the Baphomet is crazy to me. It's crazy to me. I get that it sets up a lethal, but how realistic is that? You know what I mean? Now, with the Evo point being gone, this next turn is going to be rough unless he top decks.
Yeah, his hand just simply doesn't have what he needs to actually respond to this. He doesn't even need to commit his Evo point at all.
No. Not with the White King play here. Temptress can come down and not even clear the Ektar. And no Evo point for this Righteous Devil.
Well, how many Diabolic Drains have we seen this game? I feel like we've seen at least 2.
I think we've seen 2.
Belphegor, I think, is his last hope to try to get somewhere here.
Yeah, I think Dasvi with that Evo and that push, maybe just a little too early, might have just played himself out of this game.
And pretty uncharacteristic to how he'd been playing before. Even early in the game, he made a lot of decisions to just, I'm not going to really try to develop a win condition, I just want to grind. And suddenly, without really being in any particularly huge advantage, just having this short breath of air on board, suddenly he just commits that last Evo point for damage.
Yeah,
and I think we're absolutely.
And I know I've spoken about it in times past where you have to know when to pull the trigger, and this is one of those things. Like Akamaru Red has been very conservative with his Evo points. He still had one left over. As the control player, giving up your last Evo just to poke for a couple extra points of damage, you really got to think about it. Was it worth it? How did it actually execute the end game that I have? Did it really put anything together? And what we're seeing is it's not for Dasvi.
Yeah, I think it actually speaks a lot to the depth of evolution that sometimes can't really be seen in a lot of games of Shadowverse. Just commits a spawn here. just shows him that kind of come expression. But in some matchups, evolutions can just simply be a matter of trading tempo early on in the game, and it just simply serves its purpose.
Actually, Dasvi won this game. He just won. He board locked Akamar Red. Akamar Red does not have a soul conversion, and he only has 17 points of damage he can deal. Next turn, Temptress Vampire plus the attack on the Spawning Abyss is just going to end the game. That's game. So out of all of it, he's just like, you know what? You know what? You're board locked. We're gonna see if that works for me. And as we can see, it's going to. That's crazy.
I was en route to explaining that evolution points could be pretty deep because you don't want to expend them at the wrong time in a lot of matchups. And I was about to use Dasvi as an example of that was a mistake. Little did I know, this man's a genius.
He's a freaking genius.
Little did I know this
knew
man
exactly
actually...
what he was doing. Okay, he's like, you know what? If I make this play, and he board locks himself, this is a play that you can utilize across the board. For all of you watching out there as a control player, if your opponent board locks themselves, and they can only deal a maximum amount of damage, count that damage. If it's not lethal, you can just keep it in play and do something like this crazy Spawn of the Abyss play to win the game. This is insane to me. This is one of the best finishes, especially against a player like Akamar Red that we've even seen.
I have not actually seen this like setup before, but in this situation, I had completely handed that to Akamari Red. But
me too. He played as well as he could, but Dasvi found this little crazy, spark in the back of his head on how to win, and he pulled it through.
I'm actually
now
still
let's
just
see if he actually knows it.
Okay.
Right.
I mean, if he plays anything else, then I'm willing to just completely toss it aside too. But
right. All right, here we go. Dasvi, that was an insanely good game. That was really good. We thought Dasvi was in a really bad spot. Little did we know he's smarter than all of us and found a route to victory that we did not see.
You might be right about the upset. I mean, I just feel guilty because I was about to completely write it off as a mistake, but little did I know it was actually completely intentional, calculative ballet.
I mean, he could have done all of the same things without using the Evo point. This is true, but he still found out a way, even through misusing that Evo point, to still win the game, which is excellent. Sometimes you just got to throw your hands up in the air and be like, you know what? You're board locked. You can't do anything, okay?
Right. We saw an incredible amount of personality from Dasvi there. He chose how he wanted to play the game and stuck to it the entire game. And what I was about to call was a defiance of his own game plan was actually just the final note of it.
That's right. Just
the
the ending note of his masterful. I can't think of music words right now. Symphony, yeah, symphony. That'll work.
Right. But he will have to try to wrestle this away from the very difficult to take over mid shadow list. This time playing a neutral forest, unlike neutral forests that we're used to seeing. This is neutral forest, but it also runs this super massive sort of wallet legendary endgame.
Yes. So basically doing its best to be a dragon deck as a second dragon deck. We've talked about this several times, especially with Envy, where if you can't get enough of your Saha dragon, sometimes you just play other Saha decks. And then it doesn't matter what they are. You're just like, I want to jam Sahaquil, I want to jam Israfil, and I want to jam Bahamut's. And this is a deck that can do that.
Yeah, I forget the name of the player, but I remember we saw this in Rage the last time that we casted that event. I believe there was one player playing something like this, and there was another player playing something Rune-esque with this. Do you believe in like this kind of wallet endgame, like neutral legendary sort of setup for other classes? Because Wonderland Dreams did give a lot of classes very powerful neutral synergies, but it's still something that's very hard for people
to to beat mid shadow. Absolutely. Mid Shadow's not as fast as it used to be, and any deck, I will say this out loud, any deck utilizing a Sahaquil, Israfil, Bahamut package can defeat Shadow, and it does a pretty good job of it. And especially when you have mid-game options like Hector, even beating the Beast can put a big wrench into Shadow's plan because they have to deal with it, and if they don't, it can just win the game. So I think this version is actually way better against Shadow specifically, but as an overall deck, I mean, it's okay. It's fine.
Right. I don't really imagine this is the sort of list that one could confidently bring onto ladder, but in this matchup against this man, Mr. Akamaru Red, I think Dasvi has a pretty incredibly calculated out and very well thought out game plan.
And I've got to say a few things for Akamaru Red. Akamaru Red has probably been the most consistent, best player that we've seen on the entire NGE, right? On the EU side of things, anyway. And he plays meta decks. He plays them very consistently, very well. Doesn't make a lot of mistakes, if any. But I think we're starting to get to a point where we're seeing it hurt him to play the same decks, to not do anything special, like no Phantom House, no Cerberuses, no Deathly Tyrants, nothing out of the ordinary. You can build a deck that just beats mid Shadow, and I think Dasvi recognized this, and I think he brought 3 decks that just beat mid Shadow. I think that's what his goal was, and I think we're seeing it right now.
Yeah, I opened by saying that you couldn't do that, but I mean, look at where I am now. Look at how Dasvi played that last game. Clearly, my mind has been completely changed.
Right. Mid Shadow's not an unbeatable force anymore. It does a very consistent thing, but you know when the turns that it can do those things is. The only thing that's really hard to wrap your head around is what they can do with Thanes. Ektar are very straightforward. Thane, a little bit less straightforward because of all the extra damage it can deal, depending on the soul conversions and the demon eaters you have in your hand. So as long as you can mathematically wrap your head around that, I think that you can, and I think Dasvi, like I said, it has shown 3 decks that definitely have a chance to do that.
Very true. But to speak of the way Akamaru Red is playing, I don't know what to make about that evolve. I feel like I was squinting at it and thinking maybe he's trying to get extra damage on the Beauty and the Beast, but I don't actually see a way in his hand that would actually count up all that damage.
Well, forget about the damage. How does Shadow deal with this turn?
Right.
There's actually not a single follower that you can play that will deal enough damage to this to kill it. So you're just gonna have to eat it.
There's Hamza.
There is Hamza.
The greatest counter alive, right? But short of that...
Oh my god, Dasvi's just gonna run away with this game. He's got Saha Israfil. He's got Elf Twins Assault. He's got a Hector. He's got a 9/7 that can attack face this turn. This looks so good.
I mean, honestly, I don't see how he loses this either at this point, because Sahaquil Israfil is just back-breaking for Akamaru Red.
Like, you play the Saha, you nail down the Israfil, you Evo the Saha into the Chimera, and then you jam the Israfil to wipe the entire board. You attack for 9, you put your opponent to 9, and you have a 9/7 that they can't kill in your hand without expending an entire Ektar.
Yes, the setup you just described would make Akamaru Red have to play Ikter, evolve it into the Beauty and the Beast, and then, assuming he did evolve the Sahaquil, it would take both zombies to clear it. Looks like that exact play is going to happen.
This is rough beats. Plus you have the Hector, and like you could next turn you just play like an Elf Twins Assault to clear board, play a Hector to prevent, you know, your 6/5 from dying or something like that. If Akamaru Red leaves something in play, which I doubt he will. But you still have the Israfil to fall back on.
Right. Something worth mentioning about the power of Sahaquil as a card is it offers... Oh, right, now I see what you're saying. I think I was just so, like, breathtaken by that play that I didn't realize this is a fine answer to it. But,
yeah.
Sahaquil as a card both allows you to answer your opponent's board, develop something small, and unlike what I mentioned of some cards like Cetus, by example, is the card that you expended or got to develop early stays in your hand. It's a threat that you'll still have later.
Yep. That's why it's so effective with cards like Zeus, because you can just play Sahaquil and the Zeus over and over if you want to be aggressive. Good with cards like Israfil, of course, like we saw for board wipes, and then you can gain life with it later. Unfortunately, Dasvi draws Ariat a little bit late, not right after the Beauty and the Beast stay alive, but will still be helpful in finishing the game out if you can manage to stick anything, even this turn. But Sarah's coming down to foil that plan.
Right. Sarah is, unlike the previous game, is going to try to put in some work here, try to get Akamaru Red back into any sort of range from which he can kind of contest the resources that Dasvi has. But Elf Twins Assault is potentially one of the strongest removal pieces in the game, is just going to close that book.
Yep. And I think for the rest of this turn, just attacking with the Kai'Sa and then Ariating the Kai'Sa just to put a 4/5 body in play is great, because again, 8 shadows. The Ektar tokens aren't going to be big enough to kill the 5 toughness, but it looks like he's electing just to keep it.
Yeah. I liked that play a lot, though I suppose it just feels so bad to use an Ariad like that, but something I guess always worth mentioning about Ariad is that the body left behind by the effect is still a very, very potent threat by itself.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely is. And I think if he would have done that this turn, he would have been in really good shape. I mean, the zombie party would have had to been used on top of the Ektar just to clear all the threats, if that's the way he wanted to go with it. Or if he would have just left the Ariad in play, that's, 8 damage that could have been going to face, or just another board control card on top of the Israfil that's going to be played next turn.
Mm-hmm. So, pretty interesting lines of play on the side of Dosby, but I think Akamari Red's not quite out of this. He did get quite a bit of healing earlier from the series, and he can start just playing his grinder pieces one by one and try to claim control of the board again.
Yeah, but every turn is scary, right? Because you want a zombie party here and not Ektar here, but that only clears off one follower from the enemy side, and then you're taking just that little bit of extra damage. You know Israfil's in hand for Dosby, so you have to be always aware of it.
Right, and at the same time, yeah, I empathize with this. It takes away some of his board's sort of active body strength, but he does get to dig a little bit further for some other sort of option that gets him out here.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this speaks to me. Yeah, he wants to play the Israfil with as much protection as he possibly can. This, however, will set up a Necro Assassin kill for this Israfil, and I think Akamara Red has successfully navigated out of this because of Dosby's little bit slower attempt to finish this game out.
All right. Even just allowing Shadow the very slightest opportunity to breathe can mean them just completely regenerating, because Akamari Red has absolutely just a commanding presence of win conditions in his own hand, which are much more effective and immediately impactful from a losing situation than are going to be Ariats.
That's right. And without utilizing her earlier, now we're just going to see her sit in hand and not really do anything, unfortunately. This doesn't mean that Dosby can't top deck something like a Beauty and the Beast. Unfortunately, it won't grow, but it will gain protection at the current time because there's only 4 cards in hand. But those Ariats could come down to finish the game later. I just don't know how effective they're going to be.
I've actually kind of seen this, I think, in pretty much every time I've seen Usual Forest played. Is Beauty and the Beast comes down, it looks amazing, and then Ariat looks like such a juicy finisher, but I've never actually once seen in a tournament game the Ariat matter. I've lost to it myself.
I think we've seen it once. In tournament play.
Potentially once, but I think it just comes down to a problem that Ariat, without specifically hitting Beauty and the Beast, is at a massive lack of consistent and hard to remove finishers in a class like Forest.
That is true. Well, he is getting a string of card draw here. Not the worst he could be doing. Is going to need to see a Bahamut or something like that soon, I believe.
Right. He has 2 more draws for it, but Akamoto Red with 2 Lurching Corpses now, Necro Assassin and Imperial Thane has an infinite wealth, or seemingly infinite wealth, of tools that'll give him either a ward with Bane or things that just absolutely prevent Bahamut from coming down. I think Akamoto Red has just pulled back into this one.
Yeah, I think he is now the favorite to win this game. Absolutely. But it's still closer. It's still like Razor's Edge. Akamara Red might have the advantage, but it's not it's not a crazy amount of advantage here. Dosby can turn this game around easily by just drawing something like a Bahamut. Obviously answered by Akamara Red, but with those threats being gone, especially if he plays the Bahamut after the Thane's played, I think Dosby can slip it right back into his favor.
Yeah. It leads us into the question of how much Akamoto Red is supposed to, or whether he can make the correct reads on how much does he commit now. The Imperial Thane does give him a lot of immediate finishing power, but I think this is particularly a bit weaker to something like a Bahamut.
Yes, it is. Now, playing the Lurching Corpse is a nod to that, and you get the White King in value afterwards, so it's not the worst play by any means. But I think he's protecting himself there, and that's if Bahamut existed. If Dosby can't manage to find it after these swings here, he might be in a lot of trouble. And by a lot of trouble, I mean dead.
Right. It had to be one of those next 3 cards after the normal draw and the 2 pops, but really, all he started to find was his sort of lower value early game cards, and I've seen this happen to Neutral Forest over and over.
Now, I think the safest play that he can make is to play the Kindly Treant into the Beauty and the Beast and just pray that Akamara Red cannot kill him. Because that will set up a lethal turn with Beauty and the Beast and give him at least protection from an attacker.
And it does take away the immediate lethal threat.
Right. Now, that being said, Necro Assassin that we know is in the hand of Akamara Red, if that play were to go down, he'd have to dodge both of the effects of the Lurching Corpse and the Necro Assassin. It looks like that's the plan he's going for.
That's it. He's playing to win now.
Ooh.
He has multiple tries in that he can play Necro Assassin onto the Lurching Corpse and get 2 shots at lethal here.
Well, he's got more than that. He can actually just jam the Lurching Corpse in, and there might be an Immortal Thane lethal that I'm not even counting right now. But he can just jam the first Lurching Corpse in, see if it hits, play the second Lurching Corpse and the Necro Assassin, get 2 more tries at it, and then just go. If he plays the Thane here...
yeah, I guess he doesn't really have the board space for a Thane lethal here, I think. Usually that involves a lot of skeletons, but...
Ooh.
Okay.
Oh!
But
he gave himself less of a chance now, and he's punished for it. And now he's going to lose the game.
I am speechless. There was a third flip for him, and I think he realizes it.
Oh, no. Oh, no. And Akamara Red's flawless streak will end with a simple misplay at the end of his Shadow game.
You know, I saw Dazvi's reaction. I think he was just as surprised as Akamari Red. I almost attributed it to the same thing, but yeah, he doesn't even know that Akamari Red had a third flip there.
Right,
but,
and mistake or not, it could have all still gone to the Beauty and the Beast. So regardless of what happened, Dazvi got that luck that he needed at the end there and took Akamari Red down. I called the upset. It's real. Listen to me.
You're gonna take credit for that? You're gonna take credit
I'm always
for
gonna take credit. What are you talking about? Come on.
So here's a lesson for everybody out there who's watching. If the thing don't die, it can get tagged by the effect multiple times. It's not like it says like, oh, there's multiple targets. We're gonna randomly choose one of each of these targets. It goes one at a time. So, wow. I was actually so surprised that he didn't take the highest probability line of play there.
I mean, it's tough. I mean, talk about decision fatigue. Akamara Red had to make so many decisions that match just in 2 games against these 2 control decks, right? And when you don't have any outside possibilities like the cards we were talking about, like Phantom Hound and stuff, every card you use has to be used at its highest value. And just one tiny slip up is all it takes. Just one tiny teensy one is all it takes.
Yep. And Akamara Red ends up falling. And that means Group B is looking a little bit different right now. Dazvi from the bottom, as you mentioned, Exo, becomes 1-3, still down there, tied with Matt Allen. And Akamara Red now becomes tied with Meow, and there are no undefeated players in Europe now. Everybody is at the best, 3-1. So that means Akamara Red, Meow, and Onion Sheep and Sizoni are kind of the top 4 players here. And just like in Group B, or in Group A, Onion Sheep and Sizoni are going to be the ones that we have to watch incredibly carefully here because they are currently tied up at that 3rd place spot. Now, everything could change, right? In the final week, if the 3-1 players lose their match and become 3-2, then it's just chaos, right?
All bets are off.
It just becomes chaos. But the instant they get 4-1, I believe if any of them get 4-1, then they can at best be tied for 1st and 2nd, so they're into the regional finals. I believe that is the math. But this math gets extremely complicated very quickly, so not going to hold any promises, but I'm fully expecting an incredibly intense tie situation here. So, with that being said, we've seen some incredible games today. How are you guys feeling? How are you feeling about the competition today, Exo?
Today's competition was probably the best I've seen from EU this entire season. I mean, we got to see a lot of the matchups that we wanted to see. We got to see the lowest ranked player take out the top ranked player in EU. We got to see really good matchups play out, really good metagaming by our competitors today. I like to say that EU probably metagames a lot more than the NA side of things does, and we really got to see it shine here. Like, 2 matchups just totally got taken over by the fact that triple control lineup versus triple aggro lineup, and just, you know, melted face with them, things like that. So today's been awesome. This has been one of the, like I said, the best EU day I think so far.
What about for you, Mofu?
I'd have to agree. I think today we saw an absurd amount of personality. We saw a lot of decisions being made with a lot of preference to personal playstyle, and I still can't get over either of those games with Dosby. I think both were so insane and came down to such extreme risks that I think they might just simply be the most intense games I've seen so far. So today has been pretty incredible.
We've seen a lot of incredible stuff and some nail biters for sure. And that will wrap up week 4 of Europe. Only 1 week left, and I can't stress this enough, right? This last week is going to be incredibly crazy because your score determines whether you can get into $6,500 for that first place finish, or if you go home with just $250 or nothing at all. So we'll have to see how that plays out. And remember, right, the players on the bottom end of the bracket, they're not 0-4, they're 1-3, which means that there could be potentially a bunch of ties that are 2-3, right? That is a possible outcome, which means they might not be out of the running just yet. They could squeeze by. But that wraps up European week 4, or Europe week 4. Remember, our website, shadowverse.ng.io, is where you can go to see a live updating standings page. So where these players are and how they're playing out their matches as we're doing the competition. You can see the most up-to-date records there. And player profiles, go ahead and click their names, and it'll tell you a little bit about the competitor and their history. Also, our Twitch panels, you can find that right below. If you're watching live right now, you can find that panel just below where you're watching. You can click a link to join our Discord there. And if you're watching on YouTube, www.twitch.tv/NGE. That's going to bring you to the streaming page. On the bottom there is going to be the panel if you want to join the Discord there. So, with that, we're finally out of the craziness of the European round robin. Tomorrow there's going to be North America. So week 4 of North America is directly tomorrow. Same time, same channel. Make sure you're there because some of those North American players are even crazier, I feel like.
Absolutely.
We'll see what decks they have to field and what they're going to bring. With that, I believe it is Mofu's turn to sign us out. So, Mofu, if you would do the honors here and set us free.
Oh my. Well, thanks for checking out EU. As Rainio has already said, NA gets even crazier. The players there I've talked to a bit, they have so much personality, just as much as EU. You'll see amazing things from them, and you'll get some really nice deck lists if you tune in. So, be sure to check that out, and see you guys next time.